Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Previously, I uploaded episode 7 of this series, which due to some mistakes in chapter directory was made a repeat of some previous events. Now this episode 7 is the continuation from episode 6. I am greatly thankful to our companions who reminded me of the mistakes and pointed out the problem, and my apologies for any trouble you guys faced. Tracy was sitting on her bed in her pajamas trying to read a novel, but failing. She thought she must have read the page she was on at least half a dozen times and still couldn't remember what it said. No, her focus was on the door to their dorm from the outside hallway. At a few minutes before curfew, the door opened and Tracy was both happy and relieved to see her blonde friend walk in. She could see the girl had a grin from ear to ear, so obviously the date had gone well. "Let me quickly get changed and I've got something to show you," said Daphne before Tracy could even ask her a single question. Tracy was just about bouncing in excitement, waiting for her friend to ready herself for bed. After she'd quickly removed her jewelry, unraveled her hair from its bun, cleaned away the little makeup she wore, and changed into pajamas, which Tracy swore she took longer to do than normal. Daphne closed the curtains around her bed and gestured for her friend to join her. Both girls then cast the silencing and do not disturb charms on the canopy and curtains about them. Harry had taught them the previous year when they'd complained about Millicent's snoring keeping them awake. Sitting on the bed, the girls sat opposite, Indian style, and Daphne showed her friend the mirror Harry had loaned to her. Opening it, Daphne gently whispered, "Padfoot," onto the mirrored surface and waited. A few moments later, the image changed to one of her mother, Isabel. "Hi, Mum," squealed the girl, happy. "Hello, sweetheart," replied Isabel. "I heard Harry planned on taking you on a bit of a date tonight." Tracy quickly came around and sat alongside her friend instead of opposite, and both stared into the mirror. "He did, and it was amazing," gushed Daphne. "The best day of my life. Let me tell you what happened." Daphne showed her the twined roses she found that morning when she first awoke. What Neville did at breakfast, with Tracy showing off her miniature white rose, all the way through to them dressing up for dinner, and how special Harry made the dinner they privately enjoyed. Though both girls should have been asleep much earlier than when they finally went to bed properly, the girls spent almost 2 hours reliving how special the day was and just engaging in girl talk. Before she signed off, due to how late it was getting, Daphne promised to send her mother some memories of the highlights of the day. As Isabel sighed after the connection was broken and folded the mirror back away from where he had been listening in from out of sight, Cygnus said, "It sounds like Harry made it truly special for her." Quickly grabbing a tissue to dab her watery eyes, Isabel replied, "Yes, he did. He really wants to allow her the experience of courting while they're at school. He's such a good and thoughtful boy." After the excitement of Valentine's Day, the school returned to normal activities. It was still bitterly cold outside, but the 7 made a lot of use of the come-and-go room. Daphne, as she had said she would, had approached Professor McGonagall, and the stern but romantic at heart Professor was quite happy to permanently transfigure the twined roses. She transfigured them into a small metallic brooch with a glazed ceramic coating about 2 inches high. Daphne had taken to wearing it all the time on her robes. Harry was using his practicing against the target dummies as both a way to get fit, improve on his use of combat magic, and cast more accurately. When he wasn't actually using the target dummies for himself, he was happily teaching the others how to do the same. Though he didn't understand why, and left the explanation as because it's magic, everyone was also quite a bit faster in their movements and motion. Daphne had said his wand hand and wand almost became a blur, it was moving so fast. By the end of March, they were all able to keep their magic effusing from themselves while casting, dodging, and being otherwise distracted. As a result of their private training, they were all becoming quite fit. Neville was rapidly losing his lingering baby fat, and both boys were becoming quite toned. The girls loved how it was making their own bodies look and were looking forward to when they would finally start to develop, as Hermione called it, shape. However, Susan had already begun since before Christmas. On hearing some of this talk, Neville leaned over to Harry and whispered, "Boobies." netted both boys blushing and sniggering. The girls were not happy when they worked out what had the boys snickering to themselves. Over the next half hour, both boys found themselves happy they'd spent a lot of time dodging and avoiding curses the target dummies had been throwing at them, as that training helped them to avoid a lot of the stinging hexes and similar the girls threw at them in retaliation, while shrieking imprecations about them being such boys as they ran about the room, ducking, weaving, and dodging. Harry's logical argument that, as they were boys, being such boys wasn't actually a bad thing apparently fell on deaf ears. As spring bloomed outside, Daphne had gone looking for Harry one weekend for lunch and found him in earnest conversation with the Weasley twins and a couple of the Gryffindor chasers. As she joined them, Alicia Spinnet was singing the praises of the Ep7 over the Nimbus 2000 as a Quidditch player's broom. "It's better at maneuvering, it's sturdier, it's better at taking hits, it's just better," she said. "Now, that might be a good thing for a beater or a chaser," replied Harry, "but speed is essential for a seeker. The Nimbus 2000 is a much faster broom and still excellent at maneuvering when you need it to. And I think the Comet 260 should be the broom of choice for a keeper." "Our Cleansweep 5s may not be as fast as the newest model," said one twin, cutting in. "However, they're more than adequate for the job as beater's brooms," said the other. "Not if you wanted to press the seeker," disagreed Harry. "A seeker on a Nimbus 2000 will render that strategy useless. He or she will just outfly you if you try." "Yes, but they do that against any other broom bar the Cleansweep 7, said Alicia. "Hence why it's the better broom. It allows the press yet retains the sturdiness needed for a beater." "Why a 260 for the keeper?" asked Daphne. "Tail smacking," said Angelina Johnson. "It may be a racing broom, but it's supposedly great at being able to be used for tail smacking a quaffle away from the hoops due to its brush shape." The conversation was lively enough it caught the attention of other Quidditch players around the room. An older Ravenclaw, who Harry recognized as the Ravenclaw Quidditch team captain, was trying to surreptitiously listen in. "I'd love to put my Nimbus 2000 against your Cleansweep 7 in a battle for the snitch," declared Harry. "I'd have you tasting my brush twigs in seconds if you tried to apply the press on me, especially if, like Fred and George, you're only on 5s. "Oh, Harry, my man," declared one twin, "we'd only need mere moments to have you knocked off your chase," said the other. "That's if you two ever decided to apply the press," said Alicia. "You're far too busy dealing with the opposing chasers." Harry felt a light tapping on his shoulder as the others were arguing. Turning to look over his shoulder, he saw the Ravenclaw Quidditch captain beckoning him away. After excusing themselves, both Harry and Daphne walked away from the table to the older Ravenclaw. "Is it true you own a Nimbus 2000? he asked. Harry nodded and said, "Yes, it was a gift from my family at Christmas." "And you play Seeker?" he asked. "I'd prefer Seeker, but I'd probably play anywhere except Keeper if given the opportunity," said Harry. "He can really fly, mister," said Daphne, leaving it hanging. "Martin," said the older boy, off-handedly. "Simon Martin." "Well, he can really fly, Mr. Martin," said Daphne. Looking amusedly at his betrothed, Harry asked, "You're not worried I'll beat your Slytherins?" "No," she said with a frown. "Flint will only accept boys onto the Slytherin team, and only older years at that. He doesn't deserve my support." "That's because they play rough and cheat," said the older boy. No one disagreed with his view. Looking thoughtful towards Harry, he said, "Our Seeker this year is Cho Chang, a second year. It's only her first year, but she's not displaying the daring needed for a go-get-'em Seeker, which is what we need. Bring your broom next year and I'll give you a tryout for the position. If you get it, there's a chaser position opening up and I'll offer that to her." "Thank you," replied Harry, a little stunned at the offer. "I'll make sure to bring it with me." The older boy gave a firm, short nod and walked away. "Oh, Harry," gushed Daphne, happy for him. "That's wonderful. I guess I'm going to have to do some practicing chasing down a snitch over summer," he grinned. "But at least I'm going to be able to keep my promise to Cygnus and Sirius and try out for the team." It seemed not much longer before exams were closing in. Harry revelled in the feeling of opposing emotions of fear of the exams and joy the summer holidays were coming among the students. Though Harry didn't need it, the rest of the group were working hard on revising the work they'd done over the year. He was happy to assist by writing up practice test sheets for them all, or just asking pop quiz-style questions. Harry walked into each exam sitting, happy he'd do quite well. As the exams were only held in each normal class, he only had a few classes where he could watch the others at different times, and he was happy to take each slowly enough that he was never the first out of the room. Often he'd wait until he was in the last third. It was only in Charms and Transfiguration did he work at his normal pace and be one of the first out of the room. Each afternoon he would escort Daphne down to the now warmer lakeside so she could unwind from the stress of the exams, but it was on the Wednesday of the exam period the others insisted on dragging Hermione down to the lake's edge to try and get the girl to unwind. And the only way they could even accomplish that much was for Harry to quote a study where it said a person did better in exam situations when they entered them more relaxed than they would otherwise be. The times they spent on the lake's edge did them all some good. Once the last exam was done, Hermione asked, "When do we get our results?" "Next week, on Wednesday," replied Harry. When the others looked at him a little funny, he said, "I asked Professor McGonagall. She was happy to tell me." "But that's more than a week before we head home on the express," said Hermione. "Whatever will we do?" "I dare say the coming fortnight will be filled with the professors handing out summer assignments," said Harry. "Really?" asked Hermione, almost eagerly. Lightly berating the girl in response, Harry replied, "Hermione, haven't I taught you yet that you don't need assignments to study?" Looking a little sad, she replied, "Yes, but assignments get marked and we get to see how well we're doing according to the professor's own schedules." That elicited a round of amused chuckles from the others. On the next Wednesday, 2 days after the end-of-year feast where it was found Slytherin won the House Cup, they received their exam results hand-delivered to their breakfast table. Hermione was the most distressed about what the results could have been, and Neville had to take it from her hand and open it lest the poor girl pass out with anxiety. After he threatened to read them out loud if she didn't read it for herself, she almost frantically ripped the results out of Neville's hand and avidly read the parchment through. As she finished, the others could all see she was ever so pleased with her results. The only downside she felt was that she didn't get higher than second in any class. As the others all read their own, it was Harry who picked up top marks in most subjects. Charms, Transfiguration, Dada and Astronomy. He was second in Herbology and third in Potions. Neville beat him out for top spot in Herbology, and Daphne and Hermione, in that order, beat him out for the top spot in Potions. Hermione pulled out a sheet of parchment, quill and ink and charted everyone's results. The final result was they took all 7 top marks in Charms, Transfiguration, Dada, History of Magic and Astronomy. 5th and 7th in Potions went to others. "Bloody hell," said Neville. "Gran's going to be ever so pleased." It didn't take long for it to be known that the 7 scooped the top spots across the board. There were quite a few, especially in Ravenclaw, who weren't happy with that. Harry's response when his yearmates in the House of the Eagle confronted him about it was, "It is not my responsibility to ensure you people do your work to the best standard you can. You're supposed to be in the House of Intelligence and Wit. Demonstrate it." The older Ravenclaws backed him and scowled down anyone who thought they had a right to complain to him. One older Ravenclaw said to Marie McDougal, who wanted to berate Harry for not helping them instead of his friends, "You seem to think this is Hufflepuff House, where friends stick together and work hard together. It's not, push it, and I'll inform Professor Flitwick you need to be resorted." That Sunday afternoon, Harry and Daphne held a party for the members of the Etiquette Club, whose membership swelled to 40 members before they closed off membership for the year. The elves happily supplied some snacks and Professor Flitwick supplied a keg of butterbeer. Though some Ravenclaws were just a little disappointed there wouldn't be an exam, Harry had to point out it was a club, not a class. They attended. Standing at the front after everyone became settled, Daphne said, "Harry and I first conceived of this idea when we learned a good friend of ours was completely unaware of the traditions and customs of our world, and that Hogwarts did not provide any lessons for those unaware to learn. We felt we would be lucky if we had 24 people interested in our little club. We were very happy that within a few weeks of starting, the numbers swelled to 40. The numbers would have swelled even further if we did not make the difficult decision to close off membership and advise those who didn't get in on time to apply next year. We too feel you have all gained so much over this year we are comfortable. You can now go into Wizarding Society and purport yourselves with dignity. You will not disappoint us. Very well done to you all. It was a second-year Gryffindor who then stepped forward and, offering a proper courtly bow to Daphne, then Harry, said as he did so, "Lady Daphne, Lord Potter, on behalf of the members, I pass to you our sincere thanks for you setting aside some of your personal time to assist us in this matter. I am at your service." With a small but pleased smile, Daphne dropped a little into a formal curtsy, while Harry, as head of a noble and most ancient house, gave a small nod in return. As it was his place to do so, Harry said, "The honor was ours, Mr. Chambers. We accept your thanks in the spirit it was given, and your service is unnecessary, and that was very well done." Chambers gave an acknowledging bow in response while wearing a pleased smile. The last 2 lazy weeks had passed slowly enough that Harry was about ready to go and get the Hogwarts Express, drive and have it at Hogsmeade Station himself. He felt the last week at the castle was a complete waste of time. When Hermione pointed out they wouldn't have received their summer assignments if they didn't remain for the extra week, Harry argued back the assignments could have been handed out the week earlier. It was Tracy who said the last week was occupied with the 5th years doing their Audiobook alls, and that was why the Great Hall wasn't available when classes were normally on. And the train couldn't really do the run back to King's Cross until the 5th years were finished. Finally, on the morning of 20th June, it was time to head home for summer. The 7 gathered in the entrance hall, said goodbye to the few professors who came to see them all off, and walked out of the castle for the carriages. The last week, as Harry suspected, they had received their summer assignments from each of the professors. It made Hermione happy, at least. It took them a little effort to convince her they didn't need to complete them before they headed for home. Finally boarding the express, the 7 found themselves an unoccupied compartment. Harry had his note for the outside of the door ready and quickly stuck it to the door with a sticking charm. This time the note said, "Try knocking" on one line with the 7 directly underneath. As soon as the trunks were all stored overhead, Harry closed and locked the door before using the door sealing charm on it. He had thought about using a Notice Me Not charm, one of the latest spells he had taught himself, but thought it was for the best if he didn't, just in case someone really did need to come and see them. Just after the train departed from the platform, they had their first victim. They were still settling down and pulling out books and magazines to read. For Harry, it was the Daily Prophet, as he deliberately saved reading it until now, when there was an attempt to open the door with the latch rattling. They all waited for a few moments to see if the non-reader would knock, but when it was apparent they wouldn't, they ignored it. It happened again about half an hour later. "That'll be one of the prefects coming to check on us," said Hermione. "We should let them in." "What on earth for?" asked Harry. "The rules state that the prefects are responsible for checking on the students during the times we're aboard the express," replied Hermione almost as if she was explaining to a small child. "It's their duty." "That it is, Hermione," said Harry. "However, it states nowhere in the rules that we have to open the doors for them. But they can't do their duty if they can't get in," she said exasperatedly. "And that's their problem," said Harry, almost snapping back, before he relented a little and said, "It's a simple door sealing charm. Hermione, there's no password component or anything tricky about it. All they need to do is strip the charm off the door, then use the door unlocking charm to enter. As prefects, I would have thought they would know the spells. Of course, if they simply knocked, I'd be happy to open it for them. It would only take me but a few moments. But no, whoever was on the other side of that door, as I'm sure they've moved off by now, was being rude, even if they are wearing a prefect's badge, and there is no excuse for rudeness. Prefect badge or no prefect badge, Hermione huffed and clearly appeared to be angry about it. It was Tracy who said, "Hermione, you really need to take a breath and think before you speak. Just because someone has authority does not make them right. And there are a significant number of prefects who, when they get their badges, let it go to their heads and think it means the rules no longer apply to them. Common courtesy dictates you knock first before even thinking about entering a space not your own. A prefect badge does not absolve you of breaching those basic rules of human decency. What if we were stripped down and getting changed in here, and the person who suddenly wrenched open that door was an older bloke? Would that make it all right? Hermione frowned while she thought about that. No, it wouldn't, but we weren't getting changed, she replied. With a shrug, Tracy said, but how would whoever was outside that door know that? Hermione frowned for a while more before she sighed and replied, You're right, I didn't think it through enough, I'm sorry. Apology accepted, said Harry before Tracy said, all we can ask you to do is think it through before jumping to a conclusion. What might be wrong on first look might actually be right if you consider it for a while, and vice versa. Harry gave the girl a few minutes to think about that before asking, Do you know that by rights Hagrid should have been executed last September? Hermione looked at him in shock. What? She blurted. But why? He committed a crime that has as its consequence the sentence of death, said Harry, and the crime he committed was on the orders of Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore ordered him too, she squeaked. He nodded and replied, On the night my parents were murdered, Dumbledore sent Hagrid to my parents' cottage in Godric's Hollow, with orders to collect me and return with me to Hogwarts. Hagrid, doing as he was ordered by his boss, went to the cottage and found me in my crib upstairs. He carried me downstairs and out the door. As he was walking away up the path, my godfather, Sirius, stopped him and told Hagrid to hand me over. Hagrid refused and cited the order by Dumbledore to return with me to Hogwarts. With me so far. She nodded. All right, Sirius didn't push the issue. Instead, he foolishly went off after Pettigrew. For that, Hagrid was very lucky. At that time, I was already the heir apparent to a noble and most ancient house. Hagrid would have known that. He stepped over the lifeless bodies of my parents, after all. He comes across as a gentle soul, but he's not an idiot. Because he didn't hand me over to one of my rightful named guardians, when requested by that guardian to do so, he committed the criminal act of kidnapping. Because I was the heir apparent to a noble and most ancient house, the consequence of that action meant he should have been given the Dementor's kiss. It is only that I and my guardians knew that it was because of Hagrid's blind and foolish loyalty to Dumbledore that he did not hand me over to Sirius that night, that we didn't push to have him tried. We knew he would have been kissed if we did. Hermione looked like she was about to burst into tears from shock. Tracy handed her a handkerchief. Neville sighed and said, He's right, Hermione. Do not doubt that. Hagrid lives today only because of the grace of Harry, Sirius, my Aunt Amelia, and the green grasses. Any one of them could have demanded a trial, and there would have been one. But he was only doing as he was told, sniffled Hermione. Ah, the Nuremberg defense, said Harry. The Nazis tried that at the Nuremberg trials. It held no water then. It holds no water now. They were still executed by hanging in many cases. Lawful and just orders from authority should be obeyed, I agree, said Harry softly. If we didn't, we would have anarchy. However, it is also our duty and responsibility not to obey those orders that are either unlawful or unjust. Doing so can get you anywhere up to and including executed. But I still think people in authority should be obeyed, said Hermione a little adamantly. Sometimes they have information we do not, and it's not for us to question them about it. All right, this is going to be a little harder than I thought Harry. That's all right if you believe that, Hermione, said Harry. The others all looked at him a little weirdly. You are my protectee, are you not? He asked her. Yes, she said. I am your protector, am I not? He asked. Yes, she frowned. I'm sure you read up on what that means, correct? Yes. So, I have authority over you, correct? Yes. Nodding with a serious look on his face, he said, Good, stand up right where you are and strip yourself naked. He received a few incredulous looks from the others, and Daphne suddenly clenched his arm tight. But no one said anything. Worried? What? Asked Hermione in a soft, tremulous voice. I thought I made myself quite clear with what I said, he calmly replied. I want to stare at your naked body, stand up and strip naked. Again, his friends said nothing. He realized they were now beginning to understand what he was doing. She stuttered, but she seemed to gather herself a little and think it through before she pulled an angry expression and glared at him. No, she half screamed. Why ever not? He calmly asked. Because you have no right to demand that of me, she glared at him. I don't, he also calmly asked. You already admit I have authority over you. No, that falls outside the bounds of your authority over, she started to say before suddenly and abruptly coming to a halt. She looked at him with fury and outrage, but now understanding. You, she stuttered. Tricked you into disobeying authority. Yes, he said. Congratulations on taking that step. Daphne unlatched herself from his, now slightly numb arm, and went over to scooch in next to Hermione. She then gave the girl a hug, just as she burst into tears. After a few sobs, Hermione said, You can be a bastard sometimes, you know that. Sweet Merlin, Hermione Granger just swore. The world must be coming to an end, and the denizens of hell are getting ready for a snowball fight, grinned Harry. Oh, and I happen to have it on good authority. My parents were happily married when I was conceived and born. That earned him a few snickers from the others, including Hermione. I'm sorry, Hermione, he honestly said, a few moments later. I've just shattered one of your personal beliefs about the world around you, and for that, I'm truly sorry to have been the one who caused it. In a soft voice, Hermione then asked with her head down, So, you don't want to see me naked then? Stupidly, he replied, Oh, I didn't say that. Suddenly, wands appeared, and Harry learned the valuable lesson that you cannot dodge stinging hexes while sitting in a crowded train compartment. By the time he managed to get a shield up, he'd already been hit by 5. But at least Hermione was also laughing, even if it was a little watery. Neville, from where he was laughing further along the bench, said, You squeal like a girl, Harry, thereby proving Harry wasn't the only one who could say something stupid. He was luckier, though. He was only hit by 3 stinging hexes before getting a shield up, and that was because 2 of the girls were too shocked. Neville said it to get a cast in early enough. When Harry disembarked from the train, he was limping just a little, as was Neville. What happened to you two? Asked Cygnus. Before he had a chance to answer, Harry winced when he was grapple-hugged on a tender spot by a brunette-haired missile who made a squeeze sound. Before either boy could respond, Daphne said, Because boys can say really stupid things, sometimes, that earn them a hexing. Both boys blushed, but couldn't help grinning. You got hexed? Asked Tori, backing away a little, putting her hands on her hips and staring up at him with a frown. Who hexed you? It's all right, Tori, said Harry soothingly. I think we might have deserved it. Think? Asked Hermione. Might? Asked Daphne. The boys were just about to try and explain when a voice with a decided Weasley twin sound to it called out, Beware for your daughters, mothers. And then the other voice, Neville Lothario Longbottom is on the platform. Both roared with laughter while their mother, Molly Weasley, admonished them both for their behaviour. Harry sniggered while Neville blushed even further, but stood up proudly. Lothario? Asked Sirius, perking up. Neville sent 4 valentines on Valentine's Day, said Daphne with a little glee. 1 each to Tracy, Susan, Hannah, and Hermione. When they all arrived at the same time in the great hall at breakfast, each of the 4 kissed him in front of everyone. Neville, said Gran, a little shocked. Bah, said Sirius, quite pleased. Here, you wouldn't happen to be in need of a godfather, would you? No? What about a wingman? Sirius Black? You will not encourage him like that, huffed Gran. Actually, it was a very nice thing Neville did, Madame Longbottom, said Daphne. The girls knew it was meant in friendship. Tracy told us about it the night it happened, and Daphne sent us a memory of it, said Isabel. Would you like to come over to Greengrass Estate to watch it? Frowning, Gran said with a bit of an irritated timbre, Yes, I think I must. Neville tried to act like he'd been told off, but couldn't help grinning from ear to ear. After the Diverses and the Boneses left with Hannah in tow, the others all portkeyed back to Greengrass Estate, including Hermione. Now that the Grangers were protectees of the Greengrasses, they had permission to connect their fireplace to the Floo network. Cygnus organized it for them. The Grangers sent an owl a few weeks earlier, letting Hermione know to go back to Greengrass Estate with Cygnus and Isabel, and they'd expect her through the Flu network before dinner. Again, Harry landed in a heap on the floor. Hermione said, "Honestly, Harry, it's not that hard to master." Harry just grumbled in response before he said, "Portkeys hate me, the Flu network hates me, and I hate Sidelong Apparition. I can't win unless I travel on a broom. Brooms love me." "Well, kids," said Cygnus, "trunks up in your rooms. Hermione, Neville, you can leave yours next to the fireplace in the parlour." The four adults went into the study to watch Memories. Daphne looked at Harry with a coy smile and said, "Harry." Harry rolled his eyes and said, "Yes, dear," and putting her trunk on top of his, floated them both up the stairs. When the adults came out about half an hour later, the five kids were all in the kitchen. Astoria was asking question after question about Hogwarts, while the four students were eating sandwiches the house elves prepared for them. Gran walked up to Neville, who didn't know what to expect, and planted a kiss on the top of his head. "They're right," she said. "It was a very nice thing to do." He blushed and muttered, "Thanks, Gran." She then looked up at Harry and walked around to him. "And you," she said, before also kissing him on the head, "also did a very nice thing for Daphne. However," she said, stepping back a little and glaring at all four students, "I do not agree with such overt public displays of affection, no matter how innocent, in the Great Hall of Hogwarts in the middle of breakfast." "Yes, Gran," said the two boys, while the two girls said, "Yes, Madam Longbottom." Having gotten her message across, it was clear Gran was happy to leave it at that. "If you'd like to stay here with your friends for a little while, Neville," said Gran, "you can head home in a bit. Just be home in time for dinner, all right?" Looking up at his grandmother in surprise, Neville said, "Thank you, Gran, I will." She gave him a nod and said, "Be good." A look at Harry and she said, "You too, Harry." Harry just nodded in response. When Gran left via the Flu, Neville just had to check she'd gone. He came back a little surprised and said, "I didn't expect that." Knowing Neville's love of greenery, after they'd finished their sandwiches, Daphne said, "You've not had a chance to see our gardens, have you, Nev?" Neville perked right up and shook his head with an expression of almost craving on his face. Getting up from her chair, Daphne said, "Well, come on then." Neville was out of his chair like a rocket and following along, almost dancing with happiness. Looking at the time, Hermione said, "I'd best be making a move home. Mum and Dad will be home from work soon." Harry frowned in confusion and said, "But it's Saturday." Nodding, she replied, "They sometimes work on a Saturday to cater to those people who can't get time off work to go to the dentist. It's quite profitable for them. I dare say that, since the green grasses were willing to bring me back here and I can flew home directly from here, they've used the opportunity before the summer break and we're away on holidays." Nodding in understanding, he stood with her as she rose to walk to the parlour. Just before she reached for her trunk, he put his hand on her arm to halt her and said in a soft voice, "I'm truly sorry I upset you on the train, Hermione." She smiled at him and gave him a hug. "I'm all right now, Harry. It was just confronting at the time. Hexing you and Neville helped." Returning the hug, he just nodded on her shoulder. Backing away and picking up her trunk by its handle, she reached for the Flu powder. Dashing the powder in, she called "Dentistry," and was gone a moment later. With a sigh of remorse, Harry headed out back to see how Neville was doing with Daphne's tour of the gardens. For Harry, summer was proving to be, in a word, brilliant. However, on the evening of his birthday, where he received a small cache of very nice gifts, Harry was lying in bed ready to go to sleep when a house elf popped in, standing on the foot of his bed. It appeared to be trying not to tremble in fear, and its fingers were bandaged. "Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts," it said. "What?" asked Harry. "Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts," it said more firmly. "What on earth are you on about?" asked Harry with a frown. "Great danger will be at Hogwarts this year, Harry Potter, sir," the elf said. "Oh, great," he said sarcastically. "There was a possessed defense against the dark arts professor when I turned up at the sorting. What's it going to be this year?" "Dobby cannot say, Harry Potter," said the elf. "The great Harry Potter must stay away." "Whose elf are you?" he asked. "I's a Malfoy elf, Harry Potter," it said. So Malfoy has something in motion to cause danger to me. Right, asked Harry. Dobby cannot say Harry Potter, replied the elf. Well, that's just naffing great, isn't it? He half snarled in a mutter. Looking at the elf, Harry firmed his voice and said, Thank you for the warning, Dobby. I'll take it on board. The elf popped away without another word. Harry laid back down and was wondering what the year would bring when he finally dropped off to sleep. The next morning, he approached Cygnus about the weird visit he received from the Malfoy house elf. I just cannot fathom why he would come here to warn me, muttered Harry with a frown. And the warning, too, wasn't mentioning me in particular. It was great danger would be at Hogwarts this year, which leads me to believe he implies everyone at Hogwarts will be at risk. So why would he come and warn me? In particular, it sounds like you have a fan in a house elf, smiled Cygnus. Great, grouched Harry. It's bad enough I have young witches making moon eyes at me whenever I go into Diagon Alley or walk the corridors of Hogwarts. Now I have house elves doing it. Is the great Harry Potter getting annoyed with his fame? Asked Cygnus in a Mickey-taking voice. Harry just stuck his tongue out in reply, which of course made Cygnus laugh. But what can we do about it? Asked Harry. I don't like the idea of complaining to the Malfoys about it, as the poor thing looked like it was being abused. I'd hate to learn they killed it for warning me. We do nothing for now, replied a more serious Cygnus. The warning is too general for us to do anything else. All we can do is monitor the situation and see what develops. So it'll be a case of once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more. 3 days later, the Daily Prophet carried a story of 9 simultaneous raids on various properties of witches and wizards. Harry noticed one was on Malfoy Manor, or more properly called Black Manor. Tapping on the article while he was sitting at the breakfast table, Harry asked Cygnus, Cygnus, have you heard of these raids carried out overnight by the Aurors? Frowning, Cygnus picked up his own copy and read the article. No, I didn't know about them, he said, but they're all homes and businesses belonging to those who claimed they were under the Imperious curse to escape prosecution after the war. So, they're all Death Eaters then? He asked. Nodding, Cygnus replied, yes. So it seems the Aurors decided a lightning raid on their properties might have turned something up to prove their guilt. Looking a bit longer, he further said, Arthur Weasley was heading the raids. He's the head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office within the DMLE. I wonder why he was involved. Weasley? Asked Harry. Any relation you know of with the Weasleys at Hogwarts? Their father, replied Cygnus. A good man, if a little henpecked by his wife. Cygnus, scolded Isabel. Well, it's true, Cygnus defended himself. Molly Pruitt is a shrew who is too quick to temper and voice, but they do honestly love each other and their kids. Do you think they might have found anything? Asked Harry. I doubt it, replied Cygnus. Malfoy is too shrewd and canny to have anything that might incriminate him in any wrongdoing easily found in his home. The rest of the holiday passed with Harry spending time at Greengrass Estate, Longbottom Hall, Bones Manor, Grimmauld Place, an overnight at the Grengers, and even a couple of day trips to the Weasleys. Daphne, and sometimes Tori, came along to each, except for visiting the Weasleys. The twins sent him an invitation via Owl to spend the day with them, and he was happy to go. Harry found their home, the Burrow, to be quite an eclectic jumble of jutting rooms and windows. But it was a fun place to be, with its rickety stairs and ghoul in the attic. When the twins discovered he was offered a tryout for the seeker position on the Ravenclaw team, they even offered to help him out. So he spent a day with them in their backyard Quidditch pitch, learning what they were willing to teach him about the position. After he showed them some of the moves he'd read about in Quidditch magazines and learned how to do, they were amazed by his flying ability. Percy, however, appeared quite distracted. When he asked the twins about it, they told him Percy received 12 owls and didn't even gloat about it. But he was wearing out his poor owl with constantly flying back and forth to no one knew where. Their sister, the youngest of the Weasley children, was starting at Hogwarts that year. Harry found her to be very shy. Every time he came close to her, she'd blush profusely and run away. It wasn't until he had the guys offer her a try of his broom, after the twins and Ron tried it, of course, did she seem to come out of her shell a bit. And it was only the offer of a ride on Harry's broom that also brought the youngest male Weasley out of his self-imposed funk about the famous Harry Potter. While she, Ginny, was flying around showing off some of the things she could do, Harry said to the twins, "There flies a future seeker. You may want to help her develop that talent. Gryffindor will need her once I'm on the Ravenclaw team." The twins could only nod in agreement, quite amazed by their sister's obvious talent. At Longbottom Hall, Harry and Daphne helped Neville in the hall's old but functional small greenhouse. Neville was happy to tell them all about the plants they were working with and how they played a part in various potions. Both Harry and Daphne came away from the day, having learned so much they both agreed a professorship in herbology was clearly in Neville's future. When they visited the Granger residence, Harry was at first a little leery of the home. While it was a much larger home than Privet Drive, it still had some similarities, such as the cupboard under the stairs. Seeing him standing in the downstairs hallway at one point, staring at the small door, Daphne came and hugged him from behind, reminding him that part of his past life was just that, in the past. However, the small incident did not pass the notice of Monica, who vowed to herself to find out why Harry was so sad about and simultaneously afraid of the cupboard under the stairs. Based on what she heard Daphne tell him, she knew it had to be important. Bones Manor was similar to Potter Manor. The Boneses were once as wealthy as the Potters, but no longer. Unlike James Potter sinking much of the Potter wealth into land, overseas and Muggle businesses, the Bones' fortune was mainly in businesses that had been destroyed in the last war. However, Aunt Amelia had learned from that and had made sure to diversify as much as possible the remaining wealth of the family. And their wealth was steadily regrowing. The stewardship of House Bones was in very capable hands, and Susan would inherit a greater wealth than was available when Aunt Amelia first took control. At the Davises' manor, the Davises warmly greeted Daphne as if she was a prodigal daughter. However, both Davis' parents, Edmund and Petra, were a touch cool towards Harry, as was Tracy's older brother, Edward. It was not made clear to Harry why, but he firmly believed you can't expect everyone to like you, let alone love you. However, he treated them with respect, and soon the coldness of their initial reactions faded to a grudging respect. It was quite the abrupt change when Harry went with Susan and Daphne to the Abbott home, called the Rectory. The Abbotts were a very warm and welcoming family. Both worked full-time jobs, even though they really didn't need to, because they both believed a good day's hard work makes a person feel useful. It wasn't hard to work out that both parents were in Hufflepuff when they attended Hogwarts. While Daphne, Susan and Hannah disappeared for girl talk, Harry sought out Hannah's father, Michael, finding him working in his study. "Hello, Harry," Michael warmly welcomed him and indicated a chair on the other side of the desk. "The girl's getting too much for you?" "Normally I'm all right with it," replied Harry, walking in and sitting in the chair. "But as soon as they mentioned the 3 dreaded words, I made a bolt for it." "3 dreaded words?" the older man asked. "Yeah," replied Harry, holding up his hand and ticking them off on his fingers. "Teen Witch Weekly." Michael gave a full-throated laugh and said, "Maybe you should get in with Quidditch Quarterly first." "I may only be 12, sir," said Harry with a wry grin. "But I've already learned getting between girls and they're discussing the latest issue of that evil publication is not conducive to one's health. All 3 have become way too ready and too fast with stinging hexes for me to be comfortable upsetting them when I'm outnumbered as much as that." That elicited another laugh from his host. The older man and the young boy sat down and began what would become an enduring friendship, irrespective of their ages. Normally, well, as much as the previous year could be considered normal, Harry would have preferred to have gone in to pick up their texts for the next year early. However, Daphne and Tracy preferred to go later in the summer. In this case, that was the 19th of August. As Isabel escorted Harry and Daphne through the alley, Daphne pointed out the crowd gathered around the entrance to Flourish and Blots. Walking closer, they saw a placard that said a bloke named Gilderoy Lockhart was in the store, signing autographs for his just-released autobiography, Magical Me. "It's his books we're required to purchase for Dada this year," muttered Harry. 8 of the buggers. "Language, Mr. Potter," muttered Isabel, also looking at the queue outside the store and clearly not concentrating on Harry and Daphne. Well, said Daphne with a frown, let's get the books out of the way so we're not carrying too much while we're queued up. You actually want to get your book signed? Asked Harry, a little shocked. Well, no, replied Daphne, a little uncertain. Then we need not queue up, said Harry. Can we please just get the books and get out of there? All right, Harry, she said. Entering the store, Harry didn't realize they'd walked past the Weasleys, who were in the queue, and only a couple of people back from the front. The only other text Harry and Daphne needed was the Standard Book of Spells Grade 2 by Miranda Goshawk. He already had a copy of it in his hands the previous year. However, he had to return it to Professor McGonagall. He didn't mind, though, purchasing a copy of his own. He moved beyond the crowd and discovered Lockhart's books were only available from the stacks just behind and alongside the forget-me-not blue-wearing woodpecker, where he sat at a table surrounded by photographs of himself. Sweet Merlin, the man so vain he could be a windcock, thought Harry. He was thinking of sending Daphne into the crowd to collect the books, but realized that wouldn't have been gentlemanly of him. With a sigh, he threaded through to collect the books. There was a man taking photographs and moving around near the front. His camera kept emitting puffs of purple smoke with each photo taken. Out of the way there, snarled the photographer at some unfortunate soul. This is for the Daily Prophet. And Harry heard a voice he recognized. Ron Weasley snarled back, "Big deal." As he was about to pass Lockhart, he heard him call out, "It can't be Harry Potter." The woodpecker surged to his feet, suddenly grabbed Harry and spun around. He felt himself then yanked in closer under the fop's arm. "Nice big smile, Harry," said the fop. "Together you and I are worth the front page." Harry immediately ducked his head and dropped straight down and away. As he came up with his back to the camera and outside of the arm, he snapped out with his foot in a push kick right at Lockhart's closest ankle. As soon as he connected, Lockhart squealed like a pig and tried to lift his foot at the same time as bending to the side to grab his ankle. There was another flash and puff of purple smoke. "Never grab me like that again," snarled Harry in a near shout right into the face of Lockhart, where it was now level his own. That drew quite a few gasps of outrage from those close by, whether they were there to get books signed or were just drawn in by the crowd. Harry didn't know if they were outraged with him or Lockhart, and didn't care. Trying to rescue the situation, Lockhart slammed his foot back down and stood up straight, with his smile firmly fixed to his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, waving for quiet, "what an extraordinary moment this is. The perfect moment for me to make a little announcement I've been sitting on for some time. When young Harry here stepped into Flourish and Blots today, he only wanted to buy my autobiography, which I shall be happy to present him now, free of charge." The crowd, going with the flow, applauded. "He had no idea," Lockhart continued, "that he would shortly be getting much, much more than my book, Magical Me. He and his schoolmates will, in fact, be getting the real Magical Me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure and pride in announcing that this September I will be taking up the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The crowd cheered and clapped, and Harry found himself being presented, by way of them being shoved into his chest, with the entire works of Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry just glared back. He then collected the same set, but for Daphne, and took them away back to Daphne and Isabel. "Are you all right, Harry?" asked Isabel. "Yeah, thanks," said Harry. "He startled me. I wasn't expecting to be grabbed like that." "So he's the new Dada professor," said Daphne, clearly not excited by the prospect of the woodpecker teaching them. "Don't worry, Daphne," said Harry quietly. "We'll make good use of the come-and-go room and do our own studies." "But what will we actually use to study with?" she quietly asked. "I mean, it's not as if it's an OWL year, so the test isn't set by the examination board." "Then how about we track down some copies of previous OWL tests and work backwards from those?" asked Harry. "We have the text from last year, after all, and I'm sure we can track down previous second-year texts from better teachers of the subject." "That would work," she mused. "Yes, that's a good idea." While queuing up to purchase the books, there was a commotion back in the queue of those waiting to get books signed. There was the sound of raised voices before someone crashed into a bookshelf, and the sound of heavy spell books crashing down. Harry heard Fred, or maybe George, yell, "Get him, Dad!" followed by Mrs. Weasley shrieking, "No, Arthur, no!" There was a sound of more shelves being knocked over. Then one of the shop assistants cried, "Gentlemen, please, please," and then, louder than all, the voice of Hagrid, "Break it up there, gents, break it up." Looking through, Harry saw Hagrid wading toward the fracas through the sea of books. In an instant, he had pulled the combatants, Mrs. Weasley and some older gent who looked like an older version of Draco Malfoy. Apart, Mr. Weasley had a cut lip and Malfoy had been hit in the eye. Malfoy thrust an old Transfiguration book at Ginny. His eyes glittering with malice, he snarled, "Here, girl, take your book. It's the best your father can give you." Pulling himself out of Hagrid's grip, Malfoy Sr. beckoned to Draco, who was standing nearby, and swept from the shop. "Yeah, I should have ignored him, Arthur," said Hagrid, almost lifting Mr. Weasley off his feet as he straightened his robes. "Rotten to the core, the whole family. Everyone knows that. No Malfoy's worth listening to bad blood. That's what it is. Come on now. Let's get out of here." The assistant looked as though he wanted to stop them leaving, but he barely came up to Hagrid's waist and seemed to think better of it. Summer, as with all things, must come to an end, and Tuesday, the 1st of September, saw the Greengrasses and Harry back at King's Cross Station and heading for platform 9. Harry was happy to enter by way of the Muggle platforms, as it would give him a chance to see Wendell and Monica again. They were taking the day off work and were bringing Hermione in by car. He found he actually liked them. They were in a minority of people around him who understood his references to the Muggle world. The Grangers beat them to the station, so the Greengrasses met them not far away from the barrier. Harry was surprised when Daphne hurried forward and wrapped Hermione in a hug, with both girls squealing and jumping up and down a little. Hermione turned to Harry as he walked up and said, "How do I look, Harry?" "Gah!" cried Harry, feigning terror. Turning to Cygnus, he said, "Cygnus, help. She asked me one of those questions." Smirking back, Cygnus said, "Sorry, Harry, you're on your own. This is one of those character-building moments." Showing mock disappointment, Harry turned back to face Hermione. He could see she was standing there glaring at him with her hands on her hips, and so was Daphne. Said Harry. "You look wonderful, Hermione." "Uh-huh. And why is that, Harry? What have you noticed different about me?" she ominously asked. You've grown a little taller," he said. "Keep going," she said. Your hair is looking really nice. It looks like your new shampoo is really working for you," he tried. "Getting better, but you're not there yet," she said. Having a brainwave, he said, "Sorry, Hermione, but you see that lovely young lady standing next to you? We're betrothed, see? And I only have eyes for her, no one else. What I said is about all I can possibly notice." Both sets of hands left hips. Hermione crossed her arms and looked back at Harry with a bit of a smirk. "Nice save, Mr. Potter." Harry's hand flashed up to pat himself on the chest as he rocked back a couple of short steps. "I survived. Sweet Merlin, I survived one of those questions without being hexed." The adults chuckled and Isabel ruffled his hair. "Good answer." The Granger parents left a little later and the Greengrasses escorted the three kids through to the barrier. Hermione was in front with her own trolley and case on top. This time she had a pet carrier with what Harry assumed was an orange tortoiseshell cat inside. Daphne was walking alongside Harry, who was pushing the trolley with the two cases on top. Hermione passed through the barrier and Harry confidently pushed the trolley to the wall and ran into it. He nearly somersaulted over the handle of the trolley and banged his forehead on the top trunk. He came away with a slight cut over his eye. "Ow!" he cried. "What in Merlin's name?" said Cygnus. Harry backed the trolley away a little to make sure everything was okay. As surreptitiously as possible, Isabel held his head up facing her by his chin and used a minor healing charm, a pisky, to heal the cut. Cygnus then gently pushed the trolley until it began to pass through the barrier. With a shrug, he pushed right through. Daphne also successfully passed through. Once the healing was done, Harry walked up to the barrier and stuck his hand out first. The wall was solid. Isabel pulled him back and said, "Wait." She then walked up to the barrier and shoved her hand through until it looked like she was leaning against the wall. With her arm through the wall to her shoulder, she gestured for Harry to walk through. He was able to pass through and Isabel followed him. On the platform, the others were waiting anxiously. "What was that?" asked Harry. "It must be malfunctioning," said Cygnus. "No," said Harry, shaking his head. "It was only blocked when I tried to pass through. If it wasn't for Isabel sticking her arm through and holding it there, I have no doubt I'd still be out on the other side. Someone deliberately tried to prevent me getting onto the platform. What else could it be?" "I'll be heading to the ministry after you depart," said Cygnus. "I'm going to get someone to come and check the barrier and see if there's a malfunction, or if someone really has tampered with it. It should only do that if a muggle tries to walk through." "Well, we're now running a bit late," said Isabel. "You kids need to find your friends now, or find them once you're on the train." Hermione and Daphne nodded and led them down the length of the platform, looking for the other four. They found them down near the rear of the train. "You're late," said Susan. "What happened?" "Trouble with the barrier," replied Daphne. "Harry couldn't get through." "There was a problem with the barrier?" asked Aunt Amelia. Cygnus nodded and said, "I intend to head directly into the ministry and see if they can get someone out here to have a look at what happened." "I'm heading directly in too," said Aunt Amelia. "I'll join you." "I think someone might have keyed it to reject me from entering," said Harry. "Maybe have me seem as if I was a muggle and was refused." "Possible," said Cygnus. "I'll find out." The seven quickly boarded the train and found a compartment near the rear again. Harry had his note out and stuck to the outside of the door while Neville and the girls were sorting themselves out inside. Once done, he entered, closed and locked the door. Sitting in the spot waiting for him next to Daphne, he took seat. Turning to the now locked door, he placed the door sealing charm on it and sat back. "Well, that was a little excitement for the morning," he said. "I've never heard of the barrier failing before," said Daphne. "It's a little worrying." "There's always the slim possibility of it happening or failing altogether," said Susan. "That's why there's an emergency exit a little further along the platform. It's just a normal door that leads into a janitor's workroom, which then exits onto the outside platform 9. "Good to know," said Harry. They were about an hour into the journey when Harry excused himself to go to the toilet. As he was returning, he ran across a young blonde-haired girl with almost silver eyes who was dragging her trunk behind her. He noticed she was wearing small radishes as earrings. Her wand was tucked behind her right ear. "Hello," he said. "Didn't like the people you were sitting with?" "No, they demanded I leave," she said in a soft, dreamy voice. "I have no idea why." Said Harry. "Well, we have one spare seat in our compartment. You can come and sit with us, I guess." "Thank you, that would be nice," she said. Harry got her turned around and led her back to their compartment. Sticking his head in the door, he asked, "Do we have room for what looks like a lost firstie for the rest of the trip?" The others all looked at each other and Daphne said, "Sure, why not?" Harry had Luna step in and take the spare seat while he levitated her trunk up into the racks. Once he had it secured, he closed the door properly and locked it, then took his seat back next to Daphne and recast the door sealing charm on the door. Daphne handled the introductions while Harry was getting himself comfortable again. When she reached Hermione, the girl asked in that same dreamy voice, "Hermione, that's a character out of a Shakespearean play, isn't it?" A little surprised, Hermione said, Yes it is. From The Winter's Tale. Very few people ever know that." The introductions continued around to Harry. He was expecting a bit of a shock from the girl. Instead, he got nothing. That surprised him. He thought her to be magical, raised based on her odd muggle clothing choices. "I like to dress this way, Harry. I like to be different," she suddenly said, as if knowing what he was thinking. "And where are my manners?" "I'm Luna Lovegood." There were a few hellos from the group while Luna smiled. She then reached around to her back pocket and drew out a magazine. At least it looked like a magazine until she opened it out and they could see it was a small newspaper. Harry could see she was holding it upside down and was reading it. Frowning a little, Harry asked, "Luna, are you aware you're holding your news magazine upside down?" "Oh yes, thank you, Harry," she replied. "I became used to reading it this way when I was younger and watched my father putting issues together on our kitchen table. I would sit opposite and read it while he was working." "That kinda makes sense," he said, a little confused. It wasn't too long before the rest of the group acted as if she wasn't there and began talking about anything and everything as they were doing before she arrived. However, by unspoken agreement, they did not specifically discuss the come-and-go room in front of her. Hermione complained about how she had to leave her favorite book, Hogwarts, a History, behind, because the Lockhart books took up too much room. Harry said, "It's okay, Hermione, you can borrow mine once we get to Hogwarts. I'll bring it with me to breakfast." "Thank you, Harry," she said gratefully. "I'll return it when I can." Harry shrugged and said, "Nah, hold on to it." She nodded. After a couple of hours, Harry decided to try to get the new girl involved. He asked her, "What house are you hoping to get sorted into, Luna?" "I will be in Ravenclaw, Harry," she calmly replied. "Don't you mean you hope to be in Ravenclaw?" he gently asked. "No," she replied with a shaking of her head. "I will be in Ravenclaw. The hat will not disappoint me on this." "Why do you want to be in Ravenclaw?" asked Daphne. "Because I have the traits of the Lady Ravenclaw. Those traits she most sought for her house," the girl said. "Well, I suppose even the hat cannot argue with that logic," said Harry. "Are you sure you have them, though?" "Very sure, Harry," she calmly replied with a smile. "Then apparently I'll be welcoming you into Ravenclaw at the sorting feast," said Harry with a smile. "I'll sit on the end of the second years and save a place for you." "I look forward to it," she replied, "though I am surprised." "Why is that?" he asked. "Because you should have been sorted into Slytherin," she said. "I'm surprised you managed to trick the hat. He must be very cross with you." "I'm sure he'll survive," laughed Harry. "Very few people know that." "May I ask why you didn't want to be sorted into Slytherin?" she asked. "I didn't want to be part of the poisoned relationship between Slytherin and Gryffindor," replied Harry with a shrug. "I understand," she simply said. "Harry, you're not supposed to trick the hat," said Hermione. "Its job is to sort you fairly." "Hermione, think what traits are supposed to be present in a Slytherin. Do you think Crabbe and Goyle should be there, knowing that, instead of in Hufflepuff?" asked Harry. "Now, Malfoy," he goes charging in. "Look at his foolishness in challenging me to a duel in front of everyone in the Great Hall. The boys are Gryffindor. And what about Ron Weasley in Gryffindor, where they pride themselves on bravery and daring-do? Doesn't he behave more like a Slytherin?" "I guess so," she said. "If you want it bad enough, the hat will place you in the house you want," said Harry. And clearly Luna wants and is determined to be in Ravenclaw. Talk turned to other matters, and their door had been attempted to be opened only twice, and no one knocked. When they were about an hour out of Hogsmeade, the guys got down the trunks for the girls and stepped outside, closing the door behind them. When the girls were finished, the boys allowed them out before sending the trunks back up, except for Harry's, which again had Daphne's school robes in it. Then they got Neville's down. The boys quickly changed and sent the trunks back up before letting the girls back in. As soon as they were comfortable again, talk returned to what they were discussing immediately before Hermione, who was wearing a wind-up wristwatch, suggested they change. On arrival at Hogsmeade, Harry told Luna to leave her trunk on board, and why. Then he escorted her off the train and sent her on her way to Hagrid, who was doing his first year's call. The seven turned towards the carriages and boarded them as soon as they managed to snag one for themselves. The ride was almost in silence except for Hermione saying, "I wonder if Professor Snape will be waiting for Harry again this time." Harry shook his head and said, "Dumbledore won't miss the sorting. I believe he genuinely enjoys it." As it was the sorting feast, the seven split and went to their own house tables. This time, Harry was quick to be as close as he could to the end, on the side facing where the hack would be placed. He made sure he left the 5 spaces for a possible 10 new housemates to be sorted into their house. Talk around the table while they're waiting for the new first years to arrive was of course what everyone did over summer, and Gilderoy Lockhart, sitting in purple robes at the head table with a wide grin on his face, Harry told his yearmates about visiting different friends and family around the island. When one of the girls asked him something about Lockhart, Harry said, "I'll have to congratulate him." "Oh," she asked. "Whatever for?" "For being the only person I've seen so far who apparently likes to wear robes even uglier than Dumbledore's." The girl wasn't happy hearing that, and wouldn't talk to him again for the rest of the night. When the first years came in, everyone first saw a big flash of light and a puff of purple smoke. At first, Harry thought the Weasley twins had decided to get their pranking in early this year. However, the Flash and Puff proved to be a blonde-haired boy with a camera. As soon as he entered the hall, he took the photograph. However, behind the snap-happy boy, he was happy to see Luna looking around in awe, just like everyone else in her incoming year cohort. The sorting song was along the same lines as the previous year, and everyone appropriately applauded. Then the sorting actually commenced. Ravenclaw picked up the first sorted, a boy named Stephen Bradley. The next was the budding photographer, Colin Creevey, who went to Gryffindor. The sorting continued with Ravenclaw picking up a few more. Harry had to ask one lass, a girl named Shirley Fawcett, to leave a space for a friend. Before long, Luna's name was called. As predicted, she ended up in Ravenclaw, and Harry applauded as much as everyone else in his house. She immediately took the seat between him and Miss Fawcett. Last to be called was Ginny Weasley. Harry felt like a bit of a heel because he hadn't thought about her for the whole train ride. As the hat was being placed on her head, he could see her concentrate really hard. It took a few moments longer than usual, but the hat eventually sorted her into Gryffindor, along with the rest of the Weasleys. Harry did notice she looked over to him a little sadly. He wondered why and hoped it wasn't because she was one of those fangirls. Ginny looked unhappy with her sort, said Luna. "You know her?" asked Harry. "Oh yes," replied Luna. "Our homes aren't that far apart. We often played as small children together." Looking a little askance at Harry, she said, "We even played at being the lucky girl who would marry Harry Potter." Dumbledore stood and gave his brief little speech he always does. Then the feast was served. Harry returned to the conversation while he was loading his plate from the wide selection before him. "Then you both must have been disappointed to learn I was actually betrothed," said Harry, not a little worried. "No, I wasn't," said Luna. "To me, it was always a game, but I think Ginny actually believed she would marry you one day. She was crushed when that article came out in the Daily Prophet. She came running to my home, carrying that issue of the Prophet and crying." "She brought a copy with her?" asked Harry. "Oh, yes. Daddy won't have it in our house. He thinks it's nothing but a lying scandal sheet that wouldn't know the truth if it was written as a statement of fact and signed in blood. He really does not like them." "Then it sounds like I need to organize a subscription to the Quibbler then," said Harry. Luna beamed at him and said, "I shall organize it for you, Harry. It will only cost a little over a galleon for the whole year, and I have subscription forms available in my trunk." At the end of the feast, the first years were led out by two prefects, and Harry hung back a bit to give Daphne a good-night kiss before they each headed for their own common rooms. Like a true feast, the sorting and other feasts, held throughout the year, were always many multiple courses. They had salad, light soup, entree, mains, and desserts. Thinly sliced cheese was always available on the table to cleanse the palate between courses. The number of courses was also the main reason they headed straight from the Great Hall to their common rooms. The feast went on for hours. The next morning, Harry was a little late to rise and found everyone but Neville and Hermione at the Hufflepuff table. "God," said Harry, "I feel like I've only just eaten and we're already sitting down for breakfast." "You'll burn it off quick enough in the come-and-go room," said Tracy. "I couldn't believe how fast over summer I started to lose that lovely toning we'd all developed last year, training with those training dummies." Nodding, Susan said, "Yes, we should have been doing something by way of exercise during the break." "Something to consider organizing for next summer," said Daphne. "I doubt the Christmas break is long enough to trouble us too much." "How about we head for the room straight after class and before lunch?" asked Tracy. "I have this irrational fear it's no longer there." The group agreed, and each would head directly to the room straight from class. As they were talking, their class schedules were handed out. Harry took one look at it and said, "It's the same as last year, nothing's different." As they were discussing classes, they were approached by young Malfoy, and both goons. He was carrying an old copy of the Daily Prophet and dumped it on the table in front of Harry, with the front page uppermost. On it was a picture of Harry just after he'd kicked Lockhart in the ankle. "But you loved that, didn't you, Potter?" said Malfoy, wearing his usual sneer. "Famous Harry Potter. Can't even go into a bookshop without making the front page." Actually, I more love the expression on the face of the woodpecker Lockhart, he laughed, before showing the others. The silly git grabbed me inappropriately. Looking up at Malfoy, he said, "Thanks for bringing that all the way from home on the express for me, Malfoy. It gives me a chance to show the others the true side of Gilderoy Lockhart, idiot extraordinaire." "I wonder if he still has the bruise," said Daphne. Malfoy had clearly hoped to embarrass Harry in front of his friends. Instead, he had unwontedly earned the thanks of the boy and aided him in providing humour for his friends. Malfoy stormed off, upset his plan didn't work out as he expected, just as Harry heard someone in a boyish, excited voice call his name in greeting. Harry looked up just in time to get half-blinded by a camera flash with the pump sound of a camera flash going off close by. He was about to yell at the particular idiot when Susan, thinking quickly, snatched the camera out of the boy's fingers and dropped it onto the table between them. Harry glared at the boy and in a quiet snarl said, "Don't ever do that again." The boy, paled and stammering, replied, "Sorry, Harry. I just wanted a picture, to send my parents." "And you in any way did not think before you acted, did you?" asked Harry. The boy just shook his head, still quite afraid. "Then I shall tell you what you did wrong, Mr. Creevey," said Harry. "Your first mistake was not asking for my permission and receiving it before you took my photo. Your second was that you acted overly familiar with me by calling me by my first name instead of calling me Mr. Potter. That was an insult." Harry reached out and lifted the camera off the table, turning it in his hands. Turning to look at the boy again, he said, "You lack common etiquette, Mr. Creevey. My betrothed, Miss Greengrass," indicating Daphne beside him, "and I run an etiquette club every other Sunday here in the castle. Next Sunday, not this one, you are to report yourself to the club room on the 3rd floor by 4:30 p.m. There you will be taught what you need to know to make your way in wizarding society. Am I clear?" The boy nodded. "Good lad," said Harry, handing him back his camera. "Do not take photos of people without their permission in advance. Again, run along," and made a shooing motion. The boy shot away as if he had a dragon looking to take a bite out of his behind. "Was that completely necessary, Harry?" asked Hermione. "Better a verbal slapdown now than someone making it a physical one later," replied Harry. "And I believe Neville, Hermione, Susan and Hannah need to make a move if they do not wish to be late to their first class of the new year," said Daphne, diffusing the situation. "And we're free until after lunch," said Harry. Just as the Snakes and Puffs were about to leave, Luna walked over and handed Harry a small parchment. "The subscription form you requested, Harry," she airily said, before starting to walk away again. "Thank you, Luna," he said. While bidding the others a good morning of study, even if it was history of magic, he pulled out ink and a quill and began to fill the subscription form out. "What have you got there, Harry?" asked Hermione. "A subscription form for the Quibbler," he said. "The news magazine Luna's dad produces?" she asked. "That's the one," replied Harry. Harry?" asked Neville a little hesitantly. "Are you aware Luna's dad, Xenophilius, is considered a little odd? The Quibbler tends to report a lot of fanciful stuff and makes it seem like it's real." "In other words," said Harry, looking up, "not that much different from the Daily Prophet then. At least with the Quibbler it appears people have learned not to take what it reports too seriously, as they do with the Prophet." Neville thought about that for a couple moments, and then snorted in amusement. "You've got a point there." "So, what shall we do until lunch then?" asked Harry. "We could study," said Hermione. "We could go up to the room early," said Neville. "We can train and Hermione can study there." "Two birds with one stone," said Harry. "Does that suit you, Hermione?" "Yes," she replied. "I figured out I can get just about any book the library offers in there. And, speaking of books," said Harry, "I've got my copy of Hogwarts A History in my bag for you, as promised. I'll even carry it for you up to the room." Hermione grinned. Clearly he was forgiven for his remarks to young Mr. Creevey. After Harry finished filling out the form, he noticed Luna had already left, so he blew on it to make sure it was dried before dropping it into his book bag, along with the ink and his quill. The three then left and headed down into the dungeons to use the hidden passageway up to the 7th floor. Reaching the needed corridor, Harry walked the 3 times while thinking of their room, and as soon as the door appeared, he led the other 2 inside. As lunch came around after a good workout with the training dummies, Harry and the others left to head for the Great Hall. On entering, they sat at the Ravenclaw table. Young Luna was already there, seeming to build some sort of castle with her food before promptly attacking it. He watched, amused for a while. Once she seemed to be able to handle talking to him, Harry pulled out his subscription to the Quibbler, together with the subscription fee of 1/5, and handed the subscription and coins over to the girl. Luna calmly took them and dropped them into her book bag before she breezily said, "Thank you, Harry. I shall see to the sending off of your subscription to Daddy after classes this afternoon. I will even include a note informing him you paid the fee directly to me." "Thank you, Luna," said Harry, with a nod. "That would be appreciated." Returning to his friends, Harry told Daphne and the others how he quickly felt when he began training with the dummies. Again, Neville and Hermione said the same. "I felt slow," he explained. "Either that or, no, I definitely felt slow. I've definitely lost a little off the edge in speed, in accuracy. That's something I'm going to have to overcome before I can advance any further." After lunch, Harry, Daphne and Tracy had defense against the dark arts, so headed upstairs to that particular classroom. When they entered, they were confronted with quite the number of photographs of the dim-witted woodpecker smiling at them over and over from the various images. As usual, the sitting arrangements divided over house lines. However, Harry went and sat between Daphne and Tracy. It earned him quite a few scowls from Slytherins and Ravenclaws alike. They had all just found their seats and were pulling out parchment quills and ink when the turquoise-robed Pratt entered. He gave some silly monologue about how great he was and then moved to his desk. Harry hadn't noticed it before, but sitting on the desk appeared to be a box shape with a black cloth covering it. "We shall first be taking a little test. This is so I have an idea of how well you all know me," the Pratt declared. And they were all treated to another dazzling smile. Lockhart called up one of the girls to come and collect a great stack of parchment to be handed around, and soon each student had 3 sheets of parchment before them. "Have you noticed how the idiot continually poses for photographs, even though there's no camera around?" muttered Harry. Both girls lightly giggled behind their hands. Looking around the classroom, Harry could see that almost all the girls were looking at the fop with dreamy smiles. At least those whose faces he could see. Finally, looking down at what was before him, Harry could see it was a test with about 18 questions on each page. "I want you all to answer the questions posed." Yet again the fop. "But have no fear, I shall make sure you're all aware of the proper answers to the questions next lesson before we move on to a practical side of defense against the dark arts for the day. For now, you may take up your quills and begin." Looking at the top sheet, Harry began to read and answer the questions. Defense against the dark arts, 2nd year essential knowledge test. What is Gilderoy's favorite color? Flash purple, the color of the smoke emitted by a wizarding camera when it takes a photograph. 2. What is Gilderoy's Lockhart's secret ambition? To prove that you actually can fool all of the people, all of the time. 3. What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date? Fooling most of the people, all of the time. 4. How many times has Gilderoy Lockhart won Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award? Never. He bribed the editor into awarding it to him each time he claims he has won it. In his book, Break with a Banshee, how did Gilderoy Lockhart bravely banish the Bandon Banshee? It doesn't say. The method he claims in the aforementioned fictional work, he is incapable of achieving. 6. Which is Gilderoy Lockhart's best side for photographs? His backside. Has Gilderoy Lockhart ever won the Dunstable Dueling Championship for Wizards or just been pipped at the post? I don't think Lockhart even knows when and where it's held. 8. Which product does Gilderoy Lockhart use to clean his teeth with to achieve his famous dazzling white smile? Hippogriff shite. He spews so much of it, he has plenty to spare. And he uses a simple cantrip to make his teeth sparkle. On and on the questions went until Harry finally reached the final question. Ford. When is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday and what would his ideal gift be? to spend decades within Azkaban for defrauding the public by claiming his works of fiction to be fact. Oh, that would be what I think would be his ideal gift. Finally setting his quill aside, Harry saw he was nearly the last to finish. Both Daphne and Tracy were reading his answers as he wrote them once he was about halfway through, and were trying hard not to burst out into loud laughter. Daphne had tears in her eyes and was making liberal use of a handkerchief, while Tracy was not far off being the same. Once he was done, he sat there trying to calm the girls down until the fop called for the tests to be handed forward. Once they were all back to him, the idiot practically strutted around to the other side of the desk. "Today we learn how to deal with pixies," beamed the idiot, while whisking the cover off the cage with a flourish. "Now, as you can plainly see, these are Cornish pixies, devilishly tricky little blighters they can be." The pixies were electric blue and about 8 inches high, with pointed faces and voices so shrill it was like listening to a lot of budgies arguing. The moment the cover had been removed, they had started jabbering and rocketing around, rattling the bars and making bizarre faces at the people nearest them. "Don't worry," the fop said a bit condescendingly. "If any of you have trouble with them, I will be here to bail you out." "Now this can prove interesting," muttered Harry to the two girls. "I wouldn't have thought we'd move to stunning spells this early. The book calls for that spell to be taught during our 3rd year." Having already drawn his own wand, the fop gave them a quick demonstration of a wand movement and said the incantation "Pesky Pixie Pestinomi." Harry just snorted. Harry made sure the two girls had the proper wand movements and incantation for the stunning spell down, while he had half an eye on the idiot. "Now, children," said the twit, "let's have a go at them, shall we?" And he opened the cage wide. It was pandemonium. The pixies shot in every direction like rockets. 2 of them seized one poor boy by the ears and lifted him into the air. Several shot straight through the window, showering the back row with broken glass. The rest proceeded to wreck the classroom more effectively than a rampaging rhino. They grabbed ink bottles and sprayed the class with them, shredded books and papers, tore pictures from the walls, upended the rubbish basket, grabbed bags and books and threw them out of the smashed window. Within minutes, half the class was sheltering under desks, and the boy was swinging from the iron chandelier in the ceiling. The only calm spot was in the back, where Tracy was shielding Harry and Daphne, while those two were having a ball shooting underpowered, stunning charms at the little blue beasties, knocking them out of the air one by one. "Come on now, round them up, they're only pixies," Lockhart shouted. He rolled up his sleeves, brandished his wand, and bellowed, "Pesca Pixie Pestonome." It had absolutely no effect. One of the pixies seized his wand and threw it out of the window too. Lockhart gulped and dived under his own desk, narrowly avoiding being squashed by the boy, who fell a second later as the chandelier gave way. The bell rang, and there was a mad rush toward the exit. In the relative calm that followed, Lockhart straightened up, caught sight of Harry, Daphne, and Tracy, who were having loads of fun, and said, "Well, I'll ask you 3 to just nip the rest of them back into their cage." He swept past them and shut the door quickly behind him. "Can you believe him?" said Tracy as one of the remaining pixies attempted to get around her shield. "He just wants to give us some hands-on experience," said Daphne, between casts while trying to take aim on a pixie that was attempting to hide behind one of the photographs. "Hands-on?" asked Harry, who was trying to take out a particularly annoying pixie that was trying to carry the now empty rubbish bin over and dump it on them. Daphne, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Daphne was giggling between shots. "You've read his books. Look at all those amazing things he's done." "Ha," replied Harry. "If he's this dangerous in other classes, especially with the firsties, and I find out about it, I'm going to get him kicked out of this school one way or the other," said Harry firmly. Kids could get hurt. Once they were sure they'd managed to stun all the little buggers, the 3 of them went around and collected up all their little bodies and stuffed them back inside the cage. "Any more?" asked Daphne. Harry and Tracy both shook their heads while checking underneath things, just in case they were wrong. Daphne closed and locked the cage, and then hit it with the Enerve It charm, Renerve It, waking them all up again. Then the 3 used wide-area repair charms, Reparo, to set most of the classroom back to rights. Once done, they left, with Harry muttering something about useless peacocks. "Come on," said Tracy. "The others are expecting us in our room. They want to know how our first class with Lockhart went, as they have him tomorrow afternoon." Once in the room, they saw Susan and Hannah talking with Neville and Hermione. Hermione had her class schedule on the table in front of her. Walking up, Harry looked down at Hermione's schedule and saw that the Dada lessons all had little hearts and sparkles around them. "Oh dear," said Harry. Hermione, finally noticing Harry was leaning over the back of her chair, gave a little eep sound before scooping up her schedule and stuffing it between the pages of a textbook. Harry sighed and walked around her chair to occupy another. "How did Dada go?" asked Neville. "As expected," said Daphne. "Lockhart is a fraud."
"What?"
gasped Hermione. "But he can't be. He's written all these books." "Hermione," said Daphne, cutting the poor girl off before she had an anxiety attack or something. "What?" gasped the girl. "He's a fraud, Hermione," said Daphne as gently as she could. "Harry's right. He couldn't even control a bunch of Cornish pixies. He fled the room and left it to us three to clean them up and dump them into a cage." "But his books he wrote," tried Hermione again. "They're fiction, Hermione," said Harry, "just like those books written about me. They're all— wait a minute." "Roy E. Guild," replied Harry, smacking himself in the forehead. "The one who supposedly wrote most of those books about me. The author's name was supposedly Roy E. Guild, but no one had even heard of him, and the publisher was keeping his yap shut." "What is it, Harry?" asked Tracy. "Hang on," he said, reaching for and into his book bag. He drew out one of Lockhart's books and turned to the inside cover where the details of the book are always written. "Yeah, I thought so. It's the same publisher. Obscurus Books in Diagon Alley. There's not that many Wizarding World publishers in Britain, Harry." "What's the big deal with this one?" asked Daphne. "The name of the author of those fantasy works we've been trying to track down to sue. Roy E. Guild. What's the first name of our new Dada professor, who also happens to have his books published through the same publisher and has experience writing fiction to make it look like fact?" "Gilderoy," said Hermione, before she gasped. "Exactly," said Harry. "Roy E. Guild is Gilderoy. Lockhart's the mongrel we've been trying to find." "But there are witnesses to much of what Professor Lockhart wrote about," tried Hermione. "There's evidence." "What? But where?" she stuttered. "That may be, Hermione," said Harry, "but there are also inconsistencies in the very books themselves that show them to be fiction." Harry sighed and pulled the books out of his book bag. He then laid them out and started flicking through them. He stopped in one book and said to Hermione, "Here, read this about the dates and where it supposedly occurred." When she'd finished, Harry placed the next book on top of the one still in her hands and said, "Now read this one. Take note of the dates and where it was supposed to have occurred." While Hermione was reading that, he picked up another and flicked through it until he landed on the right page. He held it open while Hermione read. Harry then reached for a third book and started flipping through it before he found the page he wanted. She read through the section Harry had indicated in the second book and looked up at him in confusion. "But that's not possible," she said. "There's more," he calmly said, offering her the third book before taking the first two off her. "Read from the second paragraph on the left." Then he pulled out a fourth book and flipped through it, quickly finding the right page. When Hermione looked up in further confusion, Harry offered her the fourth book and said, "Right-hand page, third paragraph." Bending her head to once again read, Hermione took note of what Harry had pointed out. Finally, Harry pulled out his copy of Magical Me and started flipping through it. He found the first of what he wanted and, as Hermione looked up, almost in tears, handed her the book and said, "Left-hand page, first paragraph." Hermione quickly flipped through the book until she found the right paragraph and read that in the next few. Hermione read through it. When she looked up, he said page 48, second paragraph. When she finished, she didn't look up, only lowering the book to her lap, and quietly said, "He lied." Over and over again, "He lied." Harry then reached out and took the book from her loose fingers, closing it and placing the lot back on the table. "Yes, he lied. There are also others, but those are the main points. I dare say those feats in his books were accomplished, but not by him." "No," said a quite sad Hermione. He couldn't have been in two places at once. Once may have been a publishing error, but not more than once, and over again. Unless they're clearly identified as fiction, books should be about educating the reader with facts. You're supposed to be able to trust they're the truth. I'm supposed to be able to trust they're the truth. Well, here we have an author who doesn't believe that. Plus, he's clearly being abetted by the publisher, replied Harry. Now that we know the true identity of Mr. Guild, I'll be letting Cygnus know so we can go after him. Neville snorted and said, "Our dear headmaster and Professor Snape." Aside, "I doubt, once this all comes out, our dear Professor Lockhart will be Dada Professor for much longer," said Susan. "Part of the requirements for the job, any job at Hogwarts, is a sterling reputation." Neville snorted and said, "Our dear headmaster and Professor Snape." Aside, Daphne drafted the letter to her father while Harry wrote down all the conflicting facts across the books. It took him a while, and Daphne had long since finished while Harry was still writing. He had only just managed to have everything written down when they had to leave hurriedly to get down to the Great Hall for dinner. If they hadn't used the shortcuts through the castle, they would have been late. Daphne carried both the letter and a copy of Harry's notes after he'd used the copy charm on them. His own copy was in his book bag. Down at the Great Hall, they decided to take seat at the Slytherin table for dinner. The new firsties all looked at them rather oddly, but didn't say a word, merely gave them room. Harry turned to the firsties as a whole and said, "You don't have to sit at your own house table for all meals, only the sorting and leaving feasts. At all other meals you can sit where you like. So if you have friends in other houses, you can go and sit with them for meals if you like. Don't ever allow anyone to tell you any different, all right?" He received just under a dozen nods back from the wide-eyed firsties. "Thank you," said one young girl. As he was talking, Hedwig entered through the owl entry ports at the peak of the roof and flew down to land in front of him. As a snowy owl, she flies silently. His only indication she'd arrived was the sound of her landing just in front of his plate. "Hello, girl," he said to her, pulling an owl treat out of his robes and offering it to her. "Daphne has a letter for you to take to Cygnus. All right?" Hedwig bobbed her head once and turned to Daphne. She then tilted slightly to her side and lifted her now higher wing to allow the harness on that side to be accessed. Quite amused, Daphne attached the letter, combined with Harry's notes, to Hedwig's harness, and said to the owl, "Thank you for doing this, Hedwig." Standing back up straight, Hedwig hopped up onto Daphne's shoulder and gave her cheek a bit of a rub before taking wing and flying back into the rafters. "Wow, she's really smart," said one of the firsties. Harry smiled back and said, "Hedwig is my bonded familiar, as well as being the owl of a head of house. She's very intelligent." From behind, Harry heard Snape say, "You're not attempting to corrupt my little snakes, are you, Potter?" Harry smiled and turned to look at the man standing behind him. "Certainly not, Professor. I am, in fact, providing them with information concerning the relationship between myself and my bonded familiar, my owl, Hedwig." Snape just huffed before moving away again. Speaking along similar thoughts to his own, Tracy said, "You've got to admit he might be a cranky mongrel at times. However, he sure takes looking after the members of his house quite seriously." A few days later, on the Saturday, Harry was walking with the others from the Great Hall after enjoying dinner down to the secret passage from the dungeons to the 7th floor when he heard a loudly whispering voice. It was a voice to chill the bone marrow, a voice of breathtaking, ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you." Harry came to a sudden halt in the middle of the corridor in shock. Susan walked into his back, not expecting him to suddenly stop. "Merlin, Harry," she said, a bit cross. "Why'd you stop like that?" "What?" he asked, trying to concentrate on what he heard. "I asked you why you stopped like that," said Susan. "No," said Harry frantically. "That voice—" "Sorry?" said Susan, looking puzzled. "What voice?" That voice that said, "Didn't you hear it?" "What are you talking about, Harry?" asked Daphne. Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound now except for the others all asking what he was talking about. Shaking his head, he replied, "It must have been nothing. I just thought I heard a voice." Shaking his head again, he said, "Forget it. I must be hearing things, and started walking again. 2 weeks later, Harry kept his promise to Hermione of the previous year. On her birthday, he gifted her with a necklace. What he didn't tell her, but Daphne knew, it was from the Potter vaults and had certain charms placed upon it. Along with the normal anti-theft charms, it had a certain amount of protection from hexes and curses. It would also alert Harry through his head of house ring if she was attacked by such anywhere within the castle or the close surrounding grounds. The necklace had a large pyrope garnet shaped in a teardrop. It was a very dark red that worked well with her brown eyes and hair. It was encased in a 9-carat gold basket frame and suspended on a 12-carat gold chain. On seeing it, Hermione nearly burst into tears. Daphne hung it around her neck as the girl was unable to concentrate enough to operate the tiny clasp. Holding the stone in the palm of her hand, Hermione said, "It's beautiful." "It is," said Hannah, "and perfect for you." Turning to Harry, she said, "You have excellent taste, Harry." With a shrug, he replied, "Well, one of my ancestors did. I just saw it and thought how it suited Hermione. That's why I've gifted it to her. Besides, as her protector, I have to go just that bit beyond the normal with gifts for her." Hermione reached out and grabbed Harry on his forearm. "No, you don't," she said. Accepting me as your protectee is more than enough." Harry just chuckled and said, "No, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. I have to show everyone else I'm still fully committed to my role as your protector. The little bauble I've given you is a mark of that." When Hermione looked to the others for confirmation as she withdrew her hand, they nodded back. Daphne said, "It's a beautiful gift that sends just the right message, Hermione. It's a very astute move on Harry's part, which is why I also agreed with it, though he didn't need my permission anyway." "I'm glad you agreed with it," said Hermione softly. "I wouldn't want to accept such an expensive gift if it made you feel uncomfortable." Daphne giggled and said, "I do not doubt Harry's love for and dedication to me, Hermione. Have no fear of that." That earned Daphne a kiss from Harry. It was the first time he'd ever initiated a mouth-to-mouth kiss, and Daphne realized it. Straight after the giving of gifts for Hermione's birthday, Harry had to grab his broom and head down to the Quidditch pitch for tryouts for the Ravenclaw team. Simone Martin, now a 7th year, had kept his promise and offered Harry the chance to try out for the seeker spot. When he arrived, he received death glares from no less than 3 third-year girls. One was Cho Chang, and the other 2 were clearly her friends as well as dorm mates. Martin, in order to gauge the skills of the 2 seekers, sent them both aloft at the same time. He told them the snitch would become visible exactly 30 seconds after he released it, which would be as soon as they rose into the normal seeker overwatch position. As Martin was giving them their instruction, the rest of the group came down to watch. "Hey," he yelled at them. "No spying." "We're not," called back Daphne. "We hope you kick Slytherin butt." Martin, not knowing how to respond to that, thought better of whatever he was going to say and ignored them. The group headed into one of the tribunes to watch. Harry asked for a chance to warm up a bit before taking to the overwatch position and was given the okay. Cho joined him. Harry shot into the air at a great rate of knots. As soon as he reached the middle of the pitch, he immediately pointed his broom straight up. At about 200 feet up, he cancelled all forward momentum and allowed the broom to fall backwards out of the sky before flipping it over backwards and pointing straight down. Accelerating down, he corkscrewed the broom before pulling up a bare 3 feet off the grass and heading straight up again, corkscrewing all the way. At about 50 feet up, he looped the broom up and over before pulling out and completing a second one. As he pulled out of the second, at speed, he heel-pushed the back of the broom out and skidded it across the sky. At the time, he was completely out of the saddle of the broom, and it was only his back foot and one hand on the handle that showed he hadn't simply lost control and was about to fall off. Just as the broom was about to come to a complete stop, he pulled the broom back under him and let it fall out of the sky before swooping towards the 3 goals at the nearer end of the field. He flew through the middle ring before looping up and over and ducking through the second, then the third. Heading into his third loop, he, instead, turned and headed back to the middle of the field, pulling a sloth grip roll for the fun of it. Diving steeply, he hopped up out of the saddle and planted his left foot on top of the knot above the brush twigs, pushing down with his foot while pulling back with his right hand, causing the broom to flare out. Just as he was about to hit the ground at barely walking pace, he dropped back into the saddle and said to the now mouth-gaping Martin, "Thanks, that should do it," before hurtling back into the sky to the overwatch position. When he reached height, he was met with a scowling Chang, who then turned her nose up at him and flew away to the other end of the field. As soon as he knew the snitch was released, he began a countdown in his head, and hoped his timing wasn't too far off. Just in case, he began searching the sky for the elusive little golden-winged ball at 25 in his count. A few seconds later, he saw it over near one of the tribunes and took off after it. Hard on its winged heels, he brushed against the walls of one of the tribunes and followed it as it ducked down almost a foot off the grass. Taking a moment, he glanced to see Chang diving towards him from on high, but nowhere near him yet. When the snitch suddenly changed direction by shooting straight up, he caught it by just about leaping out of his broom and snatching it overhead with one hand, pulling up on the handle and pushing down with his feet. Returning to Martin, he handed off his prize with a big grin on his face. Now stationary, he could hear the group cheering wildly up in the tribunes. "Merlin Potter," said Martin, "when your Slytherin girl said you could fly," he shook his head in wonder. When Chang joined them, Martin said, "All right, you may be able to fly and focus on finding the snitch, but how well will you do when there are a couple of beaters and a bludger to deal with?" He then pointed to two guys dressed as Ravenclaw beaters and said, "You two, I want you up in the air with a bludger. Your job is to make life hard for both seekers." The two looked each other before grinning and taking to the air with their bats. They carried the bludger aloft with them. Martin then said, "All right, same as last time. In the air, and I'll release the snitch. It will be visible after 30 seconds. Go." Harry and Chang immediately took off, with Harry easily outstripping Chang in getting into the overwatch position. "Go," called Martin with a voice-amplifying charm as he released the snitch. Harry immediately dove between the two beaters and pulled up, drawing the bludger after himself, and flew straight at Chang. The third year had to suddenly dive in order to avoid the bludger following Harry and flew straight at one of the beaters to get it off her tail. Harry used the opportunity to start scanning the sky. When he saw the bludger heading his way again, he allowed it to pass over him as he performed a stationary sloth grip roll and pointed the broom straight down, knowing the iron ball would perform a sharp loop and come back at him again. Instead of using one of the beaters to draw the ball off his tail, he immediately headed for Chang, who was heading back up. It again changed players and started after her. As soon as he managed to get the bludger off his tail, he sped towards the other end of the field, whereupon he caught sight of the snitch down low next to the goalposts, and he was after it. As he raced to the other end, he saw the snitch suddenly dart back towards him. However, he was unable to get his hand down fast enough, as it passed directly under his broom. Turning the broom, he quickly had it around and heading back the other way when he saw the bludger heading almost directly straight at him, and he accelerated straight back at it. At a height of about 4 feet off the ground, he performed another sloth grip roll at high speed, allowing the bludger to pass over the broom, and allowed his eyes to scan the area ahead for the elusive little golden ball. Knowing the bludger would have turned around by now, he angled his broom upwards towards the beaters and saw Chang diving down on the other side of them. Changing course, he did a lazy barrel roll over the nearest beater and headed down after Chang, allowing the speed of the broom coupled with gravity to allow him to come over the top of her. Seeing the snitch make a sudden sweep turn, he stayed with it and found himself ahead of the Eurasian girl. A few moments later, he had the snitch firmly in his hand. Returning to the ground next to Martin, he again handed the snitch off. Chang landed next to him and cast murderous eyes back at him. "You could have killed me flying over me like that. What if I had to suddenly pull up?" "That was the whole point, Miss Chang," replied Harry coolly. "I could have, if I wanted to, run you straight into the side of one of the towers. However, I did not. You had room to pull up simply by turning away." As he was responding to the furious girl, the two beaters landed next to him. One of them, Roger Davies, said, "Bloody hell, Potter, that was some incredible flying." How high up were you when you pulled that roll down near the ground? Asked the other. About 4 feet, exclaimed Martin. 4 bloody feet off the ground, and he pulls a move like that. Well, asked Harry, are we going again? No, said all three. When Martin glared at them, the 2 beaters had the decency to look abashed. Turning to Chang, Martin said, As I promised, there's a spare slot in the chasers. Do you want to try out for it? Yes, snarled Chang. Right then, said Martin, before turning to other hopefuls for the chaser and keeper slots. All those who want to try out for the vacant chaser position, up in the air. All those trying out for keeper, up in the air. Turning back to Harry, he said, Training starts Monday morning with fitness training. It's also a getting to know each other time. Meet us in the entrance hall at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Knowing a dismissal when he heard one, Harry remounted his broom and flew up into the tribune where he knew Daphne and his friends would be. He landed next to them a few moments later. Looking at their hopeful faces, he grinned and said, I got it. With a squeal of joy, Daphne threw herself into his arms before kissing him with abandon. The next morning, the rest of the group entered the great hall to find Harry half sprawled off the Ravenclaw table onto the bench seating. Daphne and Harry were the first to arrive and found him like that. Daphne sat down next to her betrothed and gave Harry a little shake, thinking him asleep. Ow, he said. Hurts. Harry? She asked. Somebody hex you? I didn't feel my ring, tell me. No, he moaned. Quidditch training. Tracy started chuckling. Come now, Harry, it couldn't have been that bad. Harry lifted his head a little and glared at the filthy snake sitting opposite. Martin said it was just going to be a getting-to-know-each-other session, he whined. He told me it was just going to be a little bit of a workout to knock the rust off our lazy summers. He told me it was only to gauge our inherent fitness levels. He's a filthy liar. Harry saw that other members of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team were taking seat at the table down its length. Except for Martin, they all glanced back with shared pain and sympathy. By the time Martin himself turned up, the rest of their group had assembled. Daphne and Tracy told them why Harry appeared half dead. When he finally felt he could lift his head without too much pain, Harry cried out, Simon Martin is a Dark Lord in disguise, and promptly dropped his head back onto the tabletop. His words were greeted with laughter from the others on the table. Even Martin grinned in response. Come now, Potter, he said. A little light workout is good for the soul. Harry flipped him the 2-fingered salute, which earned him more laughter. On the Sunday afternoon a week later, Harry and Daphne were early to their second club meeting of the year. Unsurprisingly, many of the first-year Muggle-born and raised had attended. When asked what led them to attend, they all said it was older students who had attended the previous year said they should. That sort of recommendation made both their hearts soar with pride. It's one thing for the professors to recommend the club, but when the previous or ongoing members are the ones doing the recommending, that's high praise indeed. And this time they also welcomed those from the previous year who had wanted to attend but either didn't get started early enough or their numbers would have exceeded their self-imposed limit to membership numbers. Harry made sure that those who had wanted to join the previous year and couldn't were each sent personal invitations to attend this year. When they saw one of the earliest to attend on the first day was a Ravenclaw in the year above Harry, and had judiciously attended each and every club meeting, Harry looked at him askance with a small smile. And just what brings you here, Mr. Bradley? Refresher course, Harry, the boy said brightly while trying to look innocent. Harry burst out laughing and said, A refresher course, eh? Less than 4 months since you attended the last meeting of the first intake, and you call yourself a Ravenclaw. The boy had the decency to look abashed. Take a seat, Bradley, said Harry, still laughing. However, if we need to watch our numbers, you're gone. But don't worry, we'll also by then be looking at the alternate Sunday idea of having an advanced club for those who've already been with us for a year. October faded to the end of the month when the annual Halloween feast was to be held. Thankfully, it was on a Saturday this year. Harry spent the day walking with Daphne along the edge of the lake for a while, then with the others in the come-and-go room. I was quite maudlin for a while, but the others did their best to lift his spirits. This year, Harry was not summoned by the headmaster to attend the feast. Clearly, the man could actually learn his lesson. However, he couldn't sleep either, so he went for a walk down to look in on the feast. And then Harry heard it. Rip, Peter, kill. It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in dungeons. He stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passageway. So hungry for so long. What is that, he thought. Kill, time to kill. The voice was growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving closer, moving upward. A mixture of fear and excitement gripped him as he stared at the floor. Was it a phantom, to whom stone floors didn't matter? He began to run down the stairs. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble of talk from the Halloween feast was echoing out of the great hall. Harry sprinted downstairs to the first floor. Stopping suddenly, he strained his ears. Distantly from the floor below, and growing fainter still, he heard the voice, "I smell blood. I smell blood." His stomach lurched. It's going to kill someone, he thought, taking the next flight of steps 3 at a time, trying to listen over his own pounding footsteps. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, not stopping until he turned a corner into the last, deserted passage. Something was shining on the wall ahead. He approached slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words had been daubed on the wall between 2 windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air beware. As he edged nearer, he almost slipped. There was a large puddle of water on the floor, eyes fixed on a dark shadow beneath the torches. He realized what it was at once and leapt backward with a splash. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board, her eyes wide and staring. For a few seconds, he didn't move. He knew he should run and get help, but it was already too late for that. A rumble told him that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where he stood came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. Next moment, students were entering the passage from both ends. The chatter, bustle, and noise died suddenly as the people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry stood alone in the middle of the corridor as silence fell among the mass of students pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, "Enemies of the air, beware, you'll be next, mudbloods." It was Draco Malfoy. He had pushed to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive, his usually bloodless face flushed as he grinned at the sight of the hanging, immobile cat. "So, this was you, Malfoy," snarled Harry. "What?" stammered the boy, the flush rapidly fading. Again, "No." "What's going on here? What's going on?" Attracted no doubt by Malfoy's shout, Argus Filch came shouldering his way through the crowd. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. "My cat? My cat? What's happened to Mrs. Norris?" he shrieked. And his popping eyes fell on Harry. "You," he screeched. You've murdered my cat. You've killed her. I'll kill you. Argus!" Dumbledore had arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other professors. In seconds, he had swept past Harry and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. "Come with me, Argus," he said to Filch. "You too, Mr. Potter." Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. "My office is nearest, Headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free." "Thank you, Gilderoy," said Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart, looking excited and important, hurried after Dumbledore. So did Professors McGonagall and Snape. Harry was joined by Daphne while his other friends hung back. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there was a flurry of movement across the walls. Harry saw several of the Lockharts in the pictures dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The real Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore lay Miss Norris on the polished surface and began to examine her. Harry and Daphne exchanged tense looks and sank into chairs outside the pool of candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile, and Lockhart was hovering around all of them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the transmogrifian torture. I've seen it used many times, so unlucky I wasn't there. I know the very counter-curse that would have saved her. Lockhart's comments were punctuated by Filch's dry, racking sobs. He was slumped in a chair by the desk, unable to look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Much as he detested Filch, Harry couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him, though not nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Filch, he would be expelled for sure. Dumbledore was now muttering strange words under his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand, but nothing happened. She continued to look as though she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar happening in Ouagadougou, said Lockhart. A series of attacks, the full stories in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townsfolk with various amulets which cleared the matter up at once. The photographs of Lockhart on the walls were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to remove his hairnet. At last Dumbledore straightened up. "She's not dead, Argus," he said softly. Lockhart stopped abruptly in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. "Not dead," choked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. "But why's she all stiff and frozen?" "She has been petrified," said Dumbledore. "But how, I cannot say." "Ask him," shrieked Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Harry. "No second year could have done this," said Dumbledore firmly. "It would take dark magic of the most advanced—" He did it," Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. "You saw what he wrote on the wall." "I never touched your cat," Harry said loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all the Lockharts on the walls. "Rubbish," snarled Filch. "If I might speak, Headmaster," said Snape from the shadows, and Harry's sense of foreboding increased. He was sure nothing Snape had to say was going to do him any good. "Potter may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time," he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. "But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why was he in the upstairs corridor at all? Why wasn't he at the Halloween feast?" Harry snarled back. "You already know the answer to that." "But why go up to that corridor?" asked Snape, his black eyes glittering in the candlelight. The others looked at Harry. Because, Harry said, his heart thumping very fast. Something told him it would sound very far-fetched if he told them he had been led there by a bodiless voice no one but he could hear. "Because I wasn't tired enough but wanted to go to bed." "Without any supper?" said Snape, a triumphant smile flickering across his gaunt face. "I've had more than enough experience of going to bed hungry, Professor," replied Harry with a growl. "I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful," said Snape. "It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he is ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off the Ravenclaw Quidditch team until he is ready to be honest." "Really, Professor Snape," said Harry sharply, "do you feel I hit the cat over the head with a broomstick? You have no evidence I've done anything wrong. I just happened upon the scene before everyone else." Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching look. His twinkling light blue gaze made Harry feel as though he were being X-rayed. Feeling the attempted legilimency probe, Harry growled at the old man, "Get out of my bloody head." "Innocent until proven guilty, Severus," said Dumbledore firmly, ignoring the accusation. Snape looked furious. So did Filch. "My cat has been petrified," he shrieked, his eyes popping. "I want to see some punishment." "We will be able to cure her, Argus," said Dumbledore patiently. "Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made that will revive Mrs. Norris." "I'll make it," Lockhart butted in. "I must have done it 100 times. I could whip up a mandrake restorative draught in my sleep." "Excuse me," said Snape icily, "but I believe I am the potions master at this school." There was a very awkward pause. "You may go," Dumbledore said to Harry and Daphne. "Well, thank you ever so much, Headmaster," said Harry not a little sarcastically. "And all of you, please be aware I do not take kindly to slander and libel levelled towards me." They went, and were met outside the door by the other 5. When they were far enough away from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty classroom and closed the door quietly behind them. Harry squinted at his friends' darkened faces. "Do you think I should have told them about that voice I've been hearing?" "No," said Daphne, without hesitation. "Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world." Something in Daphne's voice made Harry ask, "You do believe me, don't you?" "Of course I do," she said, "but you must admit it's quite odd." "I know it's odd," said Harry. "The whole thing's just plain weird. What was that writing on the wall about? The chamber has been opened. What's that supposed to mean?" "You know, it rings a sort of bell," said Tracy slowly. "I think someone told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once." A clock chimed somewhere. "Midnight," said Harry. "We'd better get to bed before Snape comes along and tries to frame me for something else." For a few days the school could talk of little else but the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's minds by pacing the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. Harry had seen him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. "Stuff like this isn't supposed to happen at Hogwarts," said Susan. "They'll catch the maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time." "I just hope he's got time to petrify Filch before he or she is expelled," said Neville before he raised his hand in mock surrender from the glares he got. "I'm only joking." The attack had also had an effect on Hermione. It was quite usual for Hermione to spend a lot of time reading, but she was now doing almost nothing else. Nor could Harry or the others get much response from her when they asked what she was up to, and not until the following Wednesday did they find out. Harry had been held back in potions, where Snape had made him stay behind to scrape tube worms off the desks. After a hurried late lunch, he went upstairs to meet the others in the library and saw Justin Finch-Fletchley, the Hufflepuff boy from herbology, coming toward him. Harry had just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him, turned abruptly, and sped off in the opposite direction. Harry found the others at the back of the library at their usual table. Some were working on their history of magic homework. Professor Binns had asked for a 3-foot-long composition on the medieval assembly of European wizards. "I'm still 3 inches short," said Neville, sighing and letting go of his parchment. "And Hermione's done 4 feet 7 inches and her writing's tiny." "Where is she?" asked Harry, working on his own homework. "Somewhere over there," said Neville, pointing along the shelves, "looking for another book. I think she's trying to read the whole library before Christmas." Harry told the others about Justin Finch-Fletchley running away from him. "I don't know why you care. I thought he was a bit of an idiot," said Tracy, writing away. "All that junk about Lockhart being so great." Hermione emerged from between the bookshelves. She looked irritable and at last seemed ready to talk to them. "All the copies of Hogwarts A History have been taken out," she said, sitting down next to Neville and Tracy, "and there's a 2-week waiting list. I wish I hadn't left my copy at home, but I couldn't fit it in my trunk with all the Lockhart books." "Where's the copy I loaned you?" said Harry. "I left it in my trunk upstairs," she groaned. "I wanted to read up on the legend of the Chamber of Secrets, but didn't think to grab it and bring it down." "Oh," said Harry, before searching his memories for that particular book. "Let's see. Last believed opened in May 1943 by 4th-year Gryffindor, Rubeus Hagrid, who was then expelled a month later. A Ravenclaw 5th-year, Myrtle Malone, was killed, yet no mark or spell residue, other than spells she had cast herself, was found on her body during the autopsy. The story goes that Slytherin had built on his own behalf a hidden chamber in the castle, of which the other founders knew nothing. Slytherin, according to the legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that none would be able to open it until his own true heir arrived at the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets, unleash the horror within, and use it to purge the school of all who were unworthy to study magic. The horror is believed to be some sort of monster which the heir of Slytherin alone can control. If that's the case, then it's likely to be a snake of some sort. After all, the snake was his animal of choice as he was a Parseltongue. Hang on, that doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense? Asked Hermione. Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts because he was believed to have opened the Chamber of Secrets. The one who reported it to be Hagrid was Tom Marvolo Riddle. Both Neville and Daphne gasped. Then, sixth-year Slytherin. Riddle was awarded an award for special services to the school, which then led to him becoming head boy the next year. Riddle said Hagrid did it because Hagrid had as a pet an acromantula. However, if it was supposedly the acromantula that killed the girl, then it would have left a spider bite on her body somewhere. Miss Malone's body was apparently unmarked. So Hagrid was falsely accused and expelled, said Susan, affronted. She, being the niece of the head of the DMLE, was always upset if there was a hint of someone being falsely held accountable of a crime. So, said Hermione, we know Hagrid didn't open the chamber. Perhaps we should contact the DMLE about that. And how do we prove it? Asked Harry. It's only our logical suspicions that Hagrid is innocent, after all. And it'll take a lot more than that to get the case reheard, sighed Susan. We need more evidence, said Tracy. But we're now talking about a case that occurred coming up on 50 years ago. We need to find the chamber, said Daphne. Then we'll discover just what the horror supposedly is. Slytherin's true heir, muttered Harry. It sounds like they mean the heir apparent. Why the heir apparent? Asked Neville. Because just about every ancient house, I guess, would have some of Slytherin's blood in their history, replied Harry. We, meaning you, Daphne, and I, already know that the Gaunts claim direct descendants from Slytherin, and I happen to know that the Blacks, Longbottoms, and Potters have at least one Gaunt in their bloodline. That means, if the Gaunts were direct descendants, then I'm probably a very much removed descendant of Slytherin, as is Neville, Sirius, and Malfoy, that I know of. It will probably be the same for most, if not all, of the ancient houses and many of the lesser houses. I'm a Slytherin? Near-squeaked Neville. Harry grinned and said, No, Neville, just a minor heir. A Gaunt female married into Potter House about 500 years ago. The granddaughter of that union married into Longbottom House about 50 years later. I dare say the same applies to Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff. With the blood diffusion among the houses similar to Slytherin, think about how many magicals there were in the Isles back in the 10th and 11th centuries, and you'll have an idea as to why I believe I'm right. So, said Hermione, getting back on track, you believe the true heir would be the heir apparent? Yes, replied Harry. However, just as I'm heir presumptive for House Black, yet I'm a Potter, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be the one who is closest through bloodlines to the original line of Slytherin. So there's no way to figure it out by referring to the Book of Bloodlines in the Heritage Office in the Ministry, sighed Hannah. No, mused Harry, but it may be a good place to start. We'll contact Father, said Daphne, and ask him if he can narrow it down a little for us. There might be a little problem with that, said Harry. Oh? Why? Asked Daphne. That depends on the answer to this question. Does the Book of Bloodlines recognize such bloodlines if a magical person is born from a long line of squibs? He asked. I don't know, said Daphne, realizing Harry was referring to Hermione, for instance. The others, except Hermione, all shrugged or indicated they didn't know either. But still, said Hannah, it's a place to start. I think the Ministry doesn't recognize an heir if the line has squibbed for more than 3 generations, said Susan. But does magic recognize an heir even if the Ministry doesn't? Asked Hermione. No one had an answer for that, but Harry and Daphne both hoped they'd find out at Christmas. Letters written, the group had no time to attack other homework before afternoon classes, so they organized to meet up in the room to go over homework together. After class, and in their room, the 7 quickly started working on homework. Harry, Susan, and Hannah had astronomy that night, and all 3 wanted to get an evening nap in, so they only had until dinner to get done what they needed to get done. I've been thinking, said Hermione. Oh, that's dangerous sign, said Neville with a smirk to take the sting out of the words. Hermione just poked her tongue out at him and turned to Harry. You said the girl's name who was killed the last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened was Myrtle Malone, right? Right, said Harry, wondering where she was going with this. Well, there's a girl's bathroom right next to where Mrs. Norris was petrified. That's where all the water came from, she said. All right, he said. Well, the reason there's often water in that corridor is because there's a ghost who often haunts that particular girl's bathroom, she continued. She's constantly doing things such as blocking up the toilets and hand basins and turning all the taps on. Sorry, I'm still not seeing. Wait, said Tracy. That's Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, isn't it? Yes, Moaning Myrtle, replied Hermione, the ghost of a young witch wearing near-modern Ravenclaw robes. Well, Susan, Hannah and I have astronomy tonight and an early nap to look forward to, said Harry. Do you others think you can go and have a bit of a chat with her? Blushed Neville. It's okay, Neville, said Hermione. You can stay outside and keep an eye out. He sheepishly nodded, trying to get his embarrassment under control. The next afternoon, Harry met with Tracy and Daphne at lunch to go over a prank idea against the blonde woodpecker. As Lockhart was fond of using the teeth-flashing charm, and probably the hair-quithering charm, that was in the book of which Harry Owl ordered 2 copies early last year, he decided it might be a good idea to turn the tables on the man. So, which ones do you think we need to use? Asked an eager Tracy. I'm going with the teeth glint charm, eye sparkle charm, and hair volume charm, said Harry. Might I suggest one of you girls go with the same teeth charm and the windblown charm? That's me, said Daphne. I think my blonde hair will look better in the limited light in the classroom. And I'm going for the moist lips charm, hair volume charm, and blush charm, said Tracy with a grin. Right, said Harry, taking mental note of all that. Now I'm going to go tell the Devil Twins what I'm up to. I have a feeling they haven't thought of doing something like this, so they might want to do the same thing when next they have a class with him. With a grin he was up and across to see the Weasley twins. Gred Forge, he said as he found a spare spot opposite them to sit. Hurricanes, they said in stereo. What can Gred and Forge, pranksters extraordinaire, do for the great Harry Potter, slayer of ladies' hearts? Okay, said Harry, not knowing what that last bit meant. Daphne, Tracy and I are going to prank Floffart in Dada straight after lunch. We're going to be using a lot of those little beauty and photogenic cantrips out of my copy of that book I bought the 2 of you. Both twins grinned and said in gleeful stereo, Harrykins, I just thought you'd like to know in case you were about to unleash a Weasley prank on the woodpecker, said Harry. The twins looked at each other and, coming to a decision, turned back to Harry. We have one ready to go, but not until tomorrow night. Excellent, said Harry. Now we just need to keep the pressure up. He was just getting up when they both reached out and pulled him down again. He looked at them questioningly. Are you aware that the student body believes you to be the one who petrified Mrs. Norris? Harry snorted in disgust and said, Snape tried to claim I did it too. Dumbledore shot him down fast, though. So what really happened? I will not attend a feast that celebrates my parents' murder, replied Harry firmly. I would have liked to have been asleep in my bed. However, I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. I was heading down to peer into the Great Hall to see if I could get an idea as to how long it had to go when I heard noises coming from within the walls. I tracked those noises to that second-floor corridor and found exactly what you saw, water all over the floor and Mrs. Norris hanging petrified from the torch sconce. Thank you for telling us, Harrykins, they solemnly said together. Harry returned to his group and let them know about the twins' prank of Fluffheart the next night. Their pranks that afternoon were on. Leaving the Dada class later that afternoon, Harry and the 2 girls walked quickly down the corridor and turned the corner before they suddenly stopped and all 3 burst out laughing. They were laughing so hard Daphne and Harry had hold of one another while Tracy was leaning with her back against the wall. By the time they got themselves back under control, all 3 ended up with tears running down their cheeks. Others walking down that corridor gave them a very wide berth. During class, every time Lockhart looked in their direction, all 3 would strike a heroic pose in their seats and flash the man a winning smile. In response, Lockhart quickly lost his own smile. There was no way he could not recognize the charms the threesome were using. After all, he had the same book and had made very good use of it. His biggest problem was he could not accuse them of using the charms and cantrips out of the book, as it would also be an admission he had made use of the same book. With a chuckle, Harry asked, Do you want me to cancel the spells?"
"Merlin, no," said Tracy. "I want you to reapply them."
"Huh?" he asked, confused. "Oh, well said, Potter," smirked Daphne. "You have such a way with words." Harry blew her a raspberry and looked back at Tracy to continue. "I want to go into the Great Hall looking like this for dinner," she explained. "Surprised?" Harry said. "Oh, that's a good idea." Daphne shook her head and said, "An even better idea is if our whole group of friends do it together." That set both Harry and Tracy off again. Daphne let them go for a while before she said, "Come on. We need to go up to the room to meet up with the others. I'll let them know what I hope they'll agree to do." That evening, after most every other student entered the Great Hall for their evening meal, the 7 entered through the double doors. Eyes were twinkling, teeth were glinting, hair was perfectly coiffed, full-bodied or falling in soft curls, robes immaculate and billowing, faces lightly blushed. In all, they looked ready to step in front of a professional photographer's lens. The hall went silent as soon as they entered, and all eyes followed their walk up towards the top end of the tables. Some were openly grinning, while others were watching with concern, if not a little fear. Young Mr. Creevey, after having already been warned once, stood up with his camera and snapped a group photo of them as they were walking up between tables. Harry just glared at the boy, and he immediately sat down again. Plastering the clearly fake smiles on their faces again, the 7 looked around and managed to find they would be sitting at the Gryffindor table that night. "Ah, we shall grace the Lions with our wonderful presence tonight," said Tracy a little loudly. "I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to have us at their table." Room was quickly made for them while they all struck a pose. Neville, clearly enough to be heard across the hall, said in his best Lockhart impression, "Oh, there was no need to do that, of course. After all, I could have easily placed an expansion charm on the table and benches, for I am Neville Longbottom." Again they all struck a pose that earned quite a few open sniggers and laughter. When Harry and the others were seated, he turned to look at the head table and could see Dumbledore was clearly amused. Professor McGonagall had her head down again with her face in her hands, chuckling away, and Professor Flitwick was openly laughing. Other professors were in similar states of mirth, and even Snape was trying to hide a smile. Lockhart, however, had his fake smile firmly plastered on his face, but there was no happiness in his eyes.